Universal Occultism Channel, new books every week. If you want to pass this knowledge on, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. The Mental Body, Arthur Edward Pawel. Link to the physical book in the first pinned comment. To listen to the audiobooks without ads, consider becoming a member. Introduction. This book is the third in a series devoted to the study of the bodies of man, its two predecessors being the etheric body and the astral body. In each volume, precisely the same method has been employed. Approximately 40 works, chiefly from the pens of Dr. Annie Besant and Bishop Leadbeater, who are today regarded as the foremost authorities on the ancient wisdom in its modern theosophical expression, have been carefully examined for material concerning the mental body. The information thus gathered has been classified, arranged, and presented to the student in as orderly and consecutive a manner as the compiler has been able to achieve. No attempt has been made throughout this series either to prove or to defend the statements advanced, beyond the degree to which their own internal consistency and rationality may serve as their justification. Since the integrity of these experienced investigators and teachers is beyond dispute, the results of their researches and their doctrines are here set forth without reservation or evasion, expressed as far as possible in their own words and abridged only where necessary to secure a logical and systematic exposition of the subject. The question of proof belongs to another and far larger field. Any attempt to argue or to demonstrate the truth of the teachings would have defeated the principal purpose of these volumes, which is to place before the earnest student a concise synthesis, within reasonable limits, of the doctrines drawn from the sources mentioned regarding the bodies of man and the planes or worlds to which they pertain. Those who seek proof must pursue it elsewhere. That after more than 2 years of intensive study of the writings of the two authors named, no inconsistencies or contradictions have been found, save for 2 or 3 of the most trivial kind, is in itself a striking testimony both to the accuracy of the investigators and to the coherence of the theosophical system. As in the 2 earlier works, marginal references are supplied so that the student may verify at the original sources any statement that he desires to examine. The indices of the 3 volumes, taken together with the marginal references, constitute in themselves a nearly complete index to all that concerns the etheric, astral, and lower mental worlds in the writings of Dr. Besant and Bishop Leadbeater. It is intended that a 4th volume on the causal body shall be added to the series in due course. The greater part of the material presented in this volume has been taken directly from the works of Dr. Besant and Bishop Leadbeater. The writings of Helena Petrovna Blavatsky have not been included among the authorities cited. To search the secret doctrine for passages concerning the mental body and the mental plane would have been a task beyond the powers of the compiler, and would in all likelihood have resulted in a work too abstruse for the class of student for whom these volumes are designed. The indebtedness to Helena Petrovna Blavatsky is far greater than could ever be expressed by quotations from her monumental works. Without the path she first indicated, later investigators might never have found the way, still less fashioned it into a road along which others may follow with comparative ease and security. Arthur Edward Pawel. Chapter 1. Overview of the mental body's role in human evolution. Before entering into a detailed description of the mental body of man, its functions, and the role it fulfills in his life and evolution, it is fitting to present a concise outline of the ground our study will encompass. First, we must consider the mental body as the instrument through which the self expresses itself as concrete intellect, wherein the powers of mind, including memory and imagination, are developed, and which, in the later stages of human evolution, serves as a separate and independent vehicle of consciousness, enabling man to live and function apart from both his physical and astral bodies. At the outset, it is essential for the student to recognize that in occult psychology, the mental constitution of man is divided into two distinct aspects. The mental body is concerned with particulars, with concrete thoughts such as a specific book, house, or triangle, while the causal body is concerned with principles and abstract thoughts, such as books or houses in general, or the principle of triangularity shared by all triangles. The mental body is therefore the vehicle of form thoughts, whereas the causal body is the vehicle of formless thoughts. A simple comparison may be drawn from mathematics. Arithmetic, which deals with particular numbers, pertains to the lower form aspect of mind. Algebra, which employs symbols representing numbers in general, pertains to the higher or formless aspect of mind. The terms form and formless are used here in a relative sense. Thus, a cloud or a flame, while possessing form, may nevertheless be considered formless in relation to a house or a block of wood. Next, we must examine that peculiar, semi-intelligent, and exceedingly active life substance known as the mental elemental essence, and the part it plays in the process of human thought. Following this will come an account of the structure and composition of the mental body, succeeded by a description of representative examples of mental bodies belonging to men at different stages of growth. A central feature of our study will be an investigation of kama-manas, the association or entanglement of desire with thought, in terms of which it might be possible to narrate the history of the entire human race as well as of each individual man. So intimate is this interweaving that certain schools of thought have regarded the astral and mental bodies as one vehicle of consciousness, which in fact they are for practical purposes in the case of the vast majority of mankind. The twofold activity of thought within its own sphere must also be considered, namely the radiation of thought waves and the formation, with frequent projection into space, of thought forms. The effects which these two classes of phenomena produce upon their creators and upon others will require examination, particularly in relation to thought transference, which will be discussed under the divisions of unconscious and conscious, the latter including mental healing, of which a concise outline will be offered. Attention must be given to the influence exerted by the physical body and physical surroundings generally upon the mental body and its activities, and conversely, to the influence of the mental body upon the physical body and upon material objects. The same reciprocal relationship between the astral and mental bodies must then be treated, showing how each in turn affects the other. We shall then turn more directly to the mental body itself, considering how it functions, how its powers may be cultivated and disciplined both when operating through the physical brain and when acting independently as a separate vehicle of consciousness. This inquiry naturally leads to the systematic training of the mental body, including concentration, indispensable to all effective mental work, meditation, and finally contemplation, which culminates in mystical awareness. The activity of the mental body during the sleep of the physical body will receive brief notice, after which a short account will be given of the artificial and temporary mental body known as the Mayavirupa. Finally, our study will conclude with an examination of the life that follows physical and astral death, lived upon the mental plane itself. This will have to be dealt with at some length, for we have to study the general principles underlying the course of that mental life and many of its details. We must further examine shortly typical examples of life on each of the four lower mental subplanes, in what the Theosophist calls Devachan, the Christian heaven. After proceeding so far, we shall be in a position to have grasped the reality and possibilities of the mental plane regarded as a world in itself, and we shall therefore study is as such a world, examining the nature of the life there, and the general character of its phenomena. Amongst all these we shall find the thought centers, which constitute an interesting and important feature. From these we shall pass to the Akashic records, that wonderful and infallible memory of nature in which everything is remembered and recorded, so that it may be read by anyone possessing the necessary qualifications. A chapter will then be devoted to the inhabitants of the mental plane, and then, as man passes out of the lower mental plane on the death of his mental body, we shall follow him just sufficiently to gain a glimpse of his wider and fuller life on the higher mental or causal plane. Having thus traced the pilgrimage of the man through physical death, his course through the astral plane, and, in this volume, followed him to the threshold of his true home, the causal or higher mental world, we can gain some idea of the relationship between the man in his three lower vehicles, those of the personality, and the true man in his causal body, the soul or individuality. This aspect of our study will be dealt with in the chapter on the personality and the ego. Then we take up the history once again as the man emerges from his home on his descent to rebirth in the lower worlds. Finally, a chapter will be devoted to the life of the man who has reached the stage where he is worthy to be accepted as a chela or disciple by those masters of the wisdom who, as the elder brethren of humanity, serve their younger brothers with such unerring wisdom, such tireless patience, such never-failing and infinite love. For it is today within the reach of many a man who will address himself to the task of making himself worthy, to be trained by them to assist, in however small a measure, in their work for the service of the world, and it is also possible to set out, more or less categorically, the qualifications necessary before that inestimable privilege can be conferred. Chapter 2. Nature and Evolution of Mental Elemental Matter. Before we can profitably examine the mental body in its composition, structure, or modes of operation, it is necessary to describe what is termed mental elemental essence. The student will recall that after the formation of the atomic conditions of matter on each plane of nature, the third aspect of the Trinity descends into the ocean of virgin matter and, by imparting his vitality, awakens the atomic matter to new powers and possibilities, resulting in the production of the lower subdivisions of every plane. Into matter thus quickened there descends the second great outpouring of the divine life, or, expressed in Christian symbolism, the Son is incarnated of the Holy Spirit and the Virgin Mary. This outpouring of the divine life is designated by different names at the various stages of its descent. Taken as a whole, it is frequently called monadic essence, especially when clothed only in the atomic matter of the different planes, for it has then become suitable for the furnishing of permanent atoms to monads. When it animates non-atomic molecular matter, it is called elemental essence, a term borrowed from medieval occultists who applied it to the matter composing the bodies of nature spirits, whom they termed elementals. When, in its downward progress, it vitalizes the matter of the three higher levels of the mental plane, it is described as the first elemental kingdom. After passing through an entire chain period of evolution there, it descends to the four lower levels of the mental plane, where it constitutes the second elemental kingdom for another chain period. In this condition, it is known as mental elemental essence. During the following chain period, it passes to the astral plane, where it forms the third elemental kingdom or astral elemental essence. Each of these three is a kingdom of nature, displaying as wide a variety in the manifestations of its forms of life as do the animal and vegetable kingdoms familiar to us. In each kingdom there are also the customary 7 clearly distinct types or rays of essence, each again subdivided into 7 secondary types. Both mental and astral elemental essence are closely bound up with man, his bodies, and his evolution, as will appear more clearly in the course of our study of the mental body. It must be understood that on both the astral and the mental planes, elemental essence is quite different from the mere matter of those planes. Another truth of high importance is that the life animating both mental and astral matter is upon the descending or outward arc of evolution. For it, progress signifies passing into denser forms of matter and acquiring the capacity to express itself through them. For man, however, evolution signifies precisely the reverse. He has already descended deeply into matter, and his path now is to ascend out of it toward his divine source. Hence arises a perpetual conflict of interests between the indwelling man and the life inhabiting the substance of his several vehicles. The full significance of this supremely important fact will become increasingly apparent as our subject advances. Chapter 3. Materials and Arrangement in the Mental Body. The mental body is composed of particles belonging to the four lower divisions of the mental world, formed of mental matter corresponding to the four lower divisions of astral matter and to the solid, liquid, gaseous, and etheric matter of the physical plane. The three superior grades of mental matter are employed in the formation of the causal or higher mental body, which does not concern us here. Along with ordinary mental matter, the mental body also contains mental elemental essence, drawn from the second elemental kingdom. The physical body is composed of cells, each being a minute-separate life animated by the second outpouring, which issues from the second aspect of the deity. The same principle is true for the astral and mental bodies, within which the life of the cells displays no intelligence but manifests a powerful instinct driving downward into matter, as previously described. The form of the mental body is ovoid, shaped according to that section of the causal body which alone can manifest in the lower worlds. Its substance is not distributed evenly through the ovoid. At the center lies the physical body which powerfully attracts astral matter, and the astral matter in turn strongly attracts mental matter. As a result, the greater portion of both astral and mental substance gathers within the physical frame. To clairvoyant vision, the mental body appears as a dense mist, assuming the outline of the physical body and surrounded by an ovoid of subtler mist. For this reason, in the mental world an acquaintance is just as easily recognized as in the physical. The part of the mental body extending beyond the boundary of the physical body constitutes the mental aura. The size of both astral and mental bodies corresponds to that of the causal body, or more precisely to that part of the causal body manifesting on the lower planes. Thus, unlike the physical body which has retained the same general dimensions since Atlantean times, the mental body increases in size as the individual develops. The particles of the mental body remain in perpetual motion and undergo continual change, automatically drawing from the universal reservoir matter that sustains the combinations already formed. Despite the rapid motion of its particles, the mental body possesses a loose organization marked by certain striations dividing it irregularly into sections, each corresponding to a department of the physical brain, so that every form of thought may act through its appropriate channel. Yet, in the case of ordinary men, the mental body is still imperfectly developed, and many sections remain inactive. Thus, when such a man attempts a type of thought belonging to an undeveloped section, it must pass through another channel which happens to be active, producing awkward and incomplete thinking. This explains why some individuals naturally excel in mathematics while others cannot perform the simplest calculation, and why some instinctively comprehend and enjoy music while others fail to distinguish one melody from another. Noble thoughts generate vibrations in the finer substance of the body, which, owing to its lightness, rises to the upper part of the ovoid, whereas selfish or avaricious thoughts set in motion the coarser matter which sinks to the lower part. Consequently, the ordinary man who frequently yields to selfish impulses enlarges the lower portion of his mental body, producing the appearance of an egg with its broader end downward. By contrast, the man who avoids such lower impulses and devotes himself to nobler thoughts enlarges the upper part of his mental body, which then resembles an egg standing upon its narrower end. These appearances, however, are only temporary, for the natural balance of the ovoid gradually restores itself. From a study of the colors and striations of a man's mental body, the clairvoyant can perceive his character and the progress he has made in his present life. The mental body is more or less refined in its constituents, according to the stage of intellectual development at which the man has arrived. It is an object of great beauty, and delicacy and rapid motion of its particles giving it an aspect of living iridescent light, and this beauty becomes an extraordinary radiant and entrancing loveliness as the intellect becomes more highly evolved and is employed chiefly on pure and sublime topics. As we shall see in detail later, every thought gives rise to vibrations in the mental body, accompanied by a play of color described as like that of the spray of a waterfall as the sunlight strikes it, raised many degrees in color and vivid delicacy. Every mental body has a single molecule or unit, usually called the mental unit of the fourth mental subplane, which remains with the man during the whole of his incarnations. As we shall see in the course of our study, the materials of the mental body are scattered and regathered again and again, in life after life, but the mental unit remains a stable center the whole time. The mental unit may be regarded as the heart and center of the mental body, and upon the relative activity of the different parts of that unit the appearance of that body as a whole to a great extent depends. The mental unit may, of course, belong to any one of the 7 great types or rays of matter. It should be noted that all the permanent atoms and the mental unit of a man belong to the same type or ray. The mental unit thus corresponds, in the mental body, to the permanent atoms in the causal, astral, and etheric bodies. The use of the permanent atoms and of the mental unit is to preserve within themselves, as vibrating powers, the results of all the experiences through which the bodies with which they have been associated have passed. The various activities of the mind fall naturally into certain classes or divisions, and these divisions are expressed through different parts of the mental unit. Mental units are by no means all the same. They differ greatly according to the type and to the development of their owners. If a mental unit lay at rest, the force radiating from it would make a number of funnels in the mental body, just as the light shining through the slide in a magic lantern makes a large radiating funnel of light in the air between the lantern and the sheet. In this case, the surface of the mental body may be likened to the sheet because it is only at the surface that the effect becomes visible to one who is looking at the mental body from the outside, so that if the mental unit were at rest, there would be seen on the surface of the mental body a number of pictures in color, representing the various types of thought common to the person with presumably dark spaces between them. But the mental unit, like all other chemical combinations, is rotating rapidly on its axis, and the effect of this is that in the mental body there is a series of bands, not always quite clearly defined, nor always of the same width, but still readily distinguishable, and usually in about the same relative positions. The student will by now be familiar with colors and their meaning, a full list being given in the astral body. Where aspirational thought exists, it invariably shows itself in a beautiful little violet circle at the top of the ovoid of the mental body. As the aspirant draws near to the gateway of the path, this circle increases in size and radiancy, and in the initiate it is a splendid glowing cap of the most lovely color imaginable. Below it often comes the blue ring of devotional thought, usually rather a narrow one, except in the case of the few whose religion is really deep and genuine. Next to that, there may be the much broader zone of affectionate thought, which may be of any shade of crimson or rose color according to the type of affection which it indicates. Near to the zone of affection, and frequently closely connected with it, there is found the orange band, which expresses proud and ambitious thought. Again, in intimate relation with pride comes the yellow belt of intellect, commonly divided into two bands, denoting respectively the philosophical and the scientific types of thought. The place of this yellow color varies much in different men. Sometimes it fills the whole upper part of the egg, rising above devotion and affection, and in such a case pride is generally excessive. Below the group just described and occupying the middle section of the ovoid is the broad belt devoted to concrete shapes, the part of the mental body from which all ordinary thought forms issue. The principal color here is green, shaded often with brown or yellow, according to the disposition of the person. There is no part of the mental body which varies more widely than this. Some people have their mental bodies crowded with a vast number of concrete images, whereas others have only a few. In some they are clear and well outlined, in others they are vague and hazy to the last degree, in some they are classified, labeled, and arranged in the most orderly fashion, in others they are not arranged at all but are left in hopeless confusion. In the lower part of the ovoid come the belts expressing all kinds of undesirable thoughts. A kind of muddy precipitate of selfishness often fills the lower third, or even half of the mental body, and above this is sometimes a ring portraying hatred, cunning, or fear. Naturally, as a man develops, this lower part vanishes, the upper part gradually expanding until it fills the whole body, as shown in the illustrations in Man Visible and Invisible by Bishop Charles Webster Leadbeater. The general rule is, the stronger the thought, the larger the vibration, the more spiritual and unselfish the thought, the higher and more rapid is the vibration. Strength of thought produces brilliancy. Spirituality produces delicacy of color. In a later chapter, we shall describe a few typical mental bodies and indicate how various other mental qualities show themselves. Chapter 4. Primary Roles and Cognitive Processes. The mental body is the vehicle through which the self reveals and expresses itself as the concrete intellect. The mind is the reflection of the cognitional aspect of the self as knower, and the mind is the self operating within the mental body. Most individuals cannot separate the man from the mind, and therefore to them the self they seek is identified with the mind. This is natural, if not inevitable, because in the present stage of evolution the men of the fifth race are especially engaged in the development of the mental body. In earlier times the physical body had been animated as an instrument of consciousness, and the astral body has also been at least partially animated in most men. The vitalization of the mental body is the particular task that humanity is now called upon to undertake. The growth of the astral body, with its capacity for expressing desire or emotion, was the special work of the fourth root race, the Atlantean, as it is also of the fourth subrace of the fifth root race, the Celtic. As already stated, the distinctive quality which the fifth race is destined to cultivate, both in its root and in its subrace, is manas or mind, that form of intellect which discriminates and distinguishes. At the present imperfect stage, most men perceive differences chiefly from their own standpoint, not so much to comprehend them as to resist them and often to oppose them with violence. When the faculty is perfectly unfolded, however, differences will be observed calmly, with the sole aim of understanding them and discerning what is best. At the present stage of the fifth subrace, weakness in others is regarded as an opportunity to exploit, to enslave, or to trample upon for the sake of self-advancement, rather than as something to be strengthened and aided to endure on its own. Yet, however unpleasing these early stages may appear, the development of the mental faculty is indispensable, for the true spirit of criticism is essential to genuine progress. The sixth root race, as well as the sixth subrace of the fifth root race, will be devoted principally to the growth of spirituality, with synthesis, compassion, and eagerness to serve as prominent features. The present condition of human mental and emotional development requires further explanation. The current fourth round is chiefly intended for the evolution of desire and emotion, while the fifth round is appointed for the development of intellect. Nevertheless, through the impulse given by the Lords of the Flame, intellect has already advanced by a whole round beyond what might be considered its normal progression. At the same time, it must be understood that the intellectual power of which modern man is so proud is but a faint foreshadowing of that which the average man will attain at the culmination of the next, the fifth round. The Lords of Flame descended from the planet Venus to this earth during the third root race and assumed direction of our evolution. Their leader, known in Indian writings as Sanat Kumara, came with 3 lieutenants and about 25 adepts as assistants. In addition, roughly 100 human beings were transferred from Venus and blended with the general humanity of the earth. These exalted beings are those referred to in the secret doctrine as projecting a spark into mindless men and awakening within them the faculty of intellect. Their influence was in truth more of a magnetic stimulation, drawing humanity toward themselves and enabling men to unfold the latent spark of mind and to become individualized. Returning from this necessary digression, it must always be borne in mind that, though for purposes of study man may be distinguished from the vehicles he employs, the self remains one, however diverse the forms through which it manifests. Consciousness is a unity, and the divisions we impose upon it are made either for convenience of study or are illusions arising from the limitations of the organs through which it functions in the lower worlds. The self possesses 3 aspects: knowing, willing, and energizing, from which arise thoughts, desires, and actions. Yet the whole self knows, wills, and acts. Nor are the functions wholly separated. When he knows, he also acts and wills. When he acts, he also knows and wills. When he wills, he also acts and knows. One function is predominant, and sometimes to such an extent as wholly to veil the others, but even in the intensest concentration of knowing, the most separate of the 3, there is always present a latent energizing and a latent willing, discernible as present by careful analysis. A little further explanation may help towards understanding. When the self is still, then is manifested the aspect of knowledge, capable of taking on the likeness of any object presented. When the self is concentrated, intent on change of state, then appears the aspect of will. When the self, in presence of any object, puts forth energy to contact that object, then shows forth the aspect of action. It will thus be seen that these 3 are not separate divisions of the self, not 3 things joined into one or compounded, but that there is one indivisible whole, manifesting in 3 ways. From the standpoint of Eastern Yoga, mind is simply the individualized consciousness, the whole of that consciousness including activities. Yoga describes the process of consciousness thus: awareness of objects, the aspect of intelligence, the dominant node of the mental plane; desire to obtain objects, the aspect of desire, the dominant node of the astral plane; endeavor to attain objects, the aspect of activity, the dominant node of the physical plane. On the Buddhic plane, cognition as pure reason predominates. Each of these aspects is present all the time, but one predominates at one time, another at another time. Returning now to a more detailed examination of mind, we learn that abstract thinking is a function of the self expressing itself through the higher mental or causal body. Concrete thinking is performed by the self working in the mental body, the lower mental body, as it is sometimes called. The mechanism of concrete thinking we shall consider in detail presently. It is also in the mental body that memory and imagination begin. The germ of memory lies in tamas, the inertia of matter, which is a tendency to repeat vibrations once started, when acted upon by energy. The mental body is thus the vehicle of the ego of the real thinker, who himself resides in the causal body. But, while the mental body is intended eventually to be the vehicle of consciousness on the lower mental plane, it also works on and through the astral and physical bodies in all manifestations that are usually called the mind in ordinary waking consciousness. In detail, the process is as follows. The act of concrete thinking sets in vibration the matter of the mental body. This vibration is transferred an octave lower, as it were, to the grosser matter of the thinker's astral body. From that, in turn, the etheric particles of the brain are affected, and through them finally the denser gray matter of the dense body is brought into action. Thus, before a thought can be translated into active consciousness on the physical brain, all these successive steps must be taken. The sympathetic nervous system is mostly connected with the astral body, while in the cerebrospinal system is more under the influence of the ego working through the mental body. The process described above may be elucidated a little further. Every particle in the physical brain has its astral counterpart, and this in turn has its mental counterpart. If, then, we suppose, for the purposes of our examination, that the whole of the physical brain be spread out so as to be one particle thick, we may further suppose that the corresponding astral and mental matter is also laid out in layers in a similar manner, the astral a little above the physical, the mental a little above the astral. We thus have 3 layers of matter of differing density, all corresponding one to the other, but not joined in any way except that here and there wires of communication exist between the physical and astral particles, and between the astral and mental particles. That would fairly represent the condition of affairs in the brain of the average man. When, therefore, such a man wishes to send a thought down from the mental to the physical level, the thought, owing to many channels not yet being open, may have to go out of its way, as it were, going laterally through the brain of mental matter until it can find a way down, passing eventually through a tube not at all suited to it, and then, when it reaches the physical level, having to move laterally again in the physical brain before it meets the physical particles which are capable of expressing it. It is obvious that such a method is awkward and clumsy. We thus can understand why it is that some people have no comprehension of mathematics, or no taste for music, art, etc. The reason is that in the part of the brain devoted to that particular faculty or subject the communications have not yet been opened up. In the adept, the perfected man, every particle has its own wire or tube, and there is also full communication in every part of the brain alike. Hence, every thought has its own appropriate channel, through which it can descend directly to the correspondingly appropriate material in the physical brain. If we analyze the process of consciousness in rough outline working from the not-self inward to the self, we observe first contact on the physical body from without. This contact is converted by the astral body into sensation. The sensation is transformed by the mental body into a precept. Then the precepts are elaborated into concepts, thus preserving the ideal form which is the material for all possibility of future thought. Every contact with the not-self modifies the mental body by rearranging a part of its materials as a picture or image of the external object. Thinking, on the form side, is the establishment of relations between these images. On the life side, it consists of corresponding modifications within the knower himself. The peculiar work of the knower is the establishment of relationships between the images formed in his mental body, the addition which he makes changing the images into thoughts. When the thinker reforms the same images over and over again, the time element, there appear memory and anticipation. The consciousness thus working is further illuminated from above with ideas that are not fabricated from materials supplied by the physical world, but are reflected into it directly from the universal mind. When a man reasons, he is adding something of his own to the information contributed from outside. As his mind works on the materials supplied to it, it links perceptions together, blending the various streams of sensation onto one, combining them into one image. This work of establishing relations, of synthesizing, is, in fact, the peculiar work of the knower. It is a speciality of the mind. Such activity of the mental body acts on the astral body as said above, and this, again, on the etheric and dense bodies, and the nervous matter of the sense body then vibrates under the impulses sent into it. This action shows itself as electrical discharges, and magnetic currents play between the particles, causing intricate interrelations. These leave what is called a nervous track, a track along which another current can run, say, across it. Hence, if a group of particles that were concerned in a particular vibration should again be made active by the consciousness repeating the same idea, the vibration runs readily along the track already formed, thus reawakening the other group of particles into activity and presenting to the consciousness an associated idea. This, briefly, is the mechanism of associated ideas, the importance of which mental phenomenon is too well known to every student of psychology to need emphasis here. It was indicated above that the peculiar work of the mind is that of establishing relations between objects of consciousness. This phrase covers all the varied processes of the mind. Hence, the Hindu speaks of the mind as the sixth sense because it takes in the sensations that enter through the five senses and combines them into a single precept, making from them one idea. The mind has also been spoken of as the Raja of the senses. Hence, also, the meaning of the sutra that the vrittis or modes of the mind are pentads. The word pentad is used in the sense in which the chemist speaks of the valency, or power of forming combinations of an element. For the mind is like a prism which gathers up the five diverse rays of sensation from the organs of sense, the five ways of knowing, the jnanendriyas, and combines them into one ray. If we also take into account the five organs of action, the karmendriyas, as well as the five organs of sense, the jnanendriyas, then the mind becomes the 11th sense. Hence in the Bhagavad Gita speaks of the 10 senses and the one, referring not to the mind as the 6th or the 11th sense, but to the senses of the mental body itself. We find that they differ very much from the senses of the physical body. The mental body comes into contact with the things of the mental world as it were directly, and over its whole surface, becoming conscious all over itself of everything which is able to impress it at all. There are thus no distinct organs for sight, hearing, touch, taste, and smell in the mental body. The word senses is, in fact, a misnomer. It is more accurate to speak of the mental sense. From this it is clear that, being able to communicate directly by thought transference, without even having to formulate thoughts in words, the barrier of language no longer exists on the mental plane, as it does on the astral plane. If a trained student passes into the mental world and there communicates with another student, his mind, in speaking, speaks at once by color, sound, and form, so that complete thought is conveyed as a colored and musical picture, instead of only a fragment of it being shown, as is the case on the physical plane by the symbols we call words. There are certain ancient books written by great initiates in color language, the language of the gods. The language is known to many cellists and is taken, so far as form and color are concerned, from the speech of the mental world, in which, as already said, a single thought gives rise to form, color, and sound simultaneously. It is not that the mind thinks in color, a sound, or a form. It thinks a thought, which is a complex vibration in mental matter, and that thought expresses itself in all these ways by the vibrations it sets up. In the mental body, therefore, a man is freed from the limitations of his separate sense organs, and is receptive at every point to every vibration which in the physical world would present itself as separate and different from its fellows. The mental body of the average man today is much less developed, relatively, than the astral and physical bodies. The normal man, at the present stage of evolution, identifies himself with the brain consciousness, the consciousness working in the cerebrospinal system. Here he feels himself distinctly and consecutively as I only on the physical plane, that is, in the waking state. Except so far as the cerebrospinal system is concerned, however, the consciousness of the average man works from the astral plane, from the realm of sensation. But in the more highly evolved men of the fifth race, the center of consciousness is in the mental body, working from the lower mental world, the man being moved by ideas more than by sensations. Thus, the average man is conscious but not self-conscious on the astral and mental planes. He recognizes astral and mental changes within himself, but does distinguish between those initiated by himself from within and those caused by impacts from without on his astral and mental vehicles. To him, they are all alike changes within himself. Hence, the physical plane alone is the only real world for him, and all phenomena of consciousness belonging to the astral and mental worlds are what he calls unreal, subjective, imaginary. He regards them as created by his own imagination, and not as results of impacts upon his astral and mental bodies from external worlds. He is, in fact, an infant on the astral and mental planes. Hence, in the undeveloped man, the mental body cannot function separately on the mental plane as an independent vehicle of consciousness during his earth life. When such a man exercises his mental faculties, these must clothe themselves in astral matter before he can become conscious of their activity. We may tabulate the principal functions of the mental body thus: to serve as the vehicle of the self for the purpose of concrete thinking, to express such concrete thoughts through the physical body, working through the astral body, the etheric brain, and the cerebrospinal system, to develop the powers of memory and imagination, to serve, as evolution proceeds, as a separate vehicle of consciousness on the mental plane. To these must be added the further function: to assimilate the results of experience gathered in each earth life and to pass on their essence to the ego, the real man living in his causal body. We may here note that the animal kingdom also employs mental matter to some extent. The higher domestic animals at least undoubtedly exercise the power of reason, although naturally the lines along which their reason can work are few and limited, and the faculty itself is far less powerful than is the case with human beings. In the case of the average animal, only the matter of the lowest subdivision of the mental plane would be employed, but with the highly developed domestic animal, the matter of the highest of the four lower levels might be to some degree utilized. Chapter 5. Illustrations of mental bodies across development levels. The mental body of a savage is represented in Man Visible and Invisible, Plate 6, opposite page 87. Where the colors agree, the mental body resembles the astral body in repose, but it contains more than this, for within it appear the germs of spirituality and intellectuality. In the savage, these elements are slight, yet they are of great importance for future development. Examining such a body in detail, one perceives at the top a dull yellow indicating a measure of intellect, though its muddy tone shows that it is directed exclusively to selfish purposes. Devotion, shown by gray-blue, is here little more than fetish worship, influenced chiefly by fear and self-interest. A muddy crimson points to the earliest beginnings of affection, still almost wholly selfish. A band of dull orange reveals a low form of pride. A vivid scarlet denotes a strong tendency to anger, easily aroused by the slightest cause. A wide area of dirty green, which occupies much of the body, signifies deceit, treachery, and avarice, the last being marked by a brownish shade. At the base of the aura lies a heavy deposit of mud color, symbolizing general selfishness and the absence of higher qualities. In the undeveloped man, the mental body contains little organized substance, chiefly of the lowest division of the plane. It is almost entirely affected by the lower vehicles, set vibrating by storms of emotion in the astral body. Apart from these impulses, it remains nearly dormant, and even under their influence is sluggish. No definite activity arises from within. External shocks are required to awaken a response. For this reason, violent experiences, whether of pleasure, anger, pain, or fear, stir the astral body into storms which in turn quicken the mental consciousness, enabling it to add something of its own to the impressions received from without. The ordinary man employs matter of the seventh or lowest mental subplane only. As this lies close to the astral plane, his thoughts are colored by the reflections of the emotional world. Few are able as yet to use the sixth subplane. Great scientific minds employ it to a considerable extent, but they too often mingle it with the lowest, and then jealousy of others' discoveries and inventions appears. The matter of the fifth subplane is freer from astral entanglement, while that of the fourth, being near the causal body, is beyond the reach of astral influence. On plate 9, opposite page 93 of the same work, is shown the mental body of an ordinary man. Here is found a larger proportion of intellect, love, and devotion with marked improvement in quality, for the colors are clearer. Pride still exists, but it is now of a higher nature, directed towards noble qualities rather than brute strength or cruelty. A good deal of scarlet remains, revealing liability to anger. The green is purer, denoting versatility and adaptability rather than deceit. In the savage, the green was placed below the scarlet, because the qualities it represented required coarser matter than that of anger. In the ordinary man, the green is found above the scarlet, showing that it now needs finer matter than that of anger. Thus, the general quality of the mental body is higher. A large portion of brown, denoting selfishness, still remains, but the tone is warmer and less harsh than before. The mental body of the average man is therefore larger, shows some organization, and contains material not only from the lowest division but also from the sixth, fifth, and fourth. As with the physical and astral bodies, so with the mental, exercise strengthens it, neglect weakens and ultimately destroys it. Every vibration set up in the mental body alters its constitution, expelling what cannot respond and replacing it with suitable matter drawn from the inexhaustible supply around. Plate 22, opposite page 121, illustrates the mental body of a developed man. In this, pride, anger, and selfishness have entirely disappeared, while the remaining colors have expanded to fill the whole ovoid and have improved in tone to such an extent that they present a wholly different impression. As all thought of self has vanished from them, they are more refined and delicate. In addition, there has appeared at the top of the aura a pure violet with golden stars, indicating the acquisition of new and greater qualities, to wit, spiritual aspiration. The power from above, which radiates through the causal body of a developed man, acts also through his mental body, though with somewhat less force, allowing for the difference between what we may call the octaves of color, between the hues belonging to the lower and the higher levels of the mental plane. The mental body has now become almost a reproduction of the causal body, just as the astral body is almost a copy at its own lower level of the mental body. The mental body of a developed man thus becomes a reflection of the causal, because the man has learned to follow solely the promptings of the higher self, and to guide his reason exclusively by them. The color, in fact, which expresses a certain quality in the causal body expresses itself not only in the mental body but even in the astral body. The color, however, as already stated, will be less delicate, less luminous and ethereal as it descends to the lower planes. In a spiritually developed man, all the coarser combinations of mental matter have been eliminated so that it contains only the finer varieties of matter of the four lower mental subdivisions, and of these again the materials of the fourth and fifth subplanes very much predominate over those of the sixth and seventh subplanes. The mental body is thus responsive to all the higher workings of the intellect, to the delicate contacts of the higher arts, to the pure thrills of the loftier emotions. Such a body is rapidly becoming ready to reproduce every impulse from the real man in the causal body, the thinker which is capable of expression in lower mental matter. Both the astral and mental bodies of a spiritual man should exhibit continually 4 or 5 splendid emotions: love, devotion, sympathy, and intellectual aspiration among them. The mental body of an arhat have very little characteristic color of their own, but are reproductions of the causal body in so far as their lower octaves can express it. They have a lovely shimmering iridescence, a sort of opalescent, mother-of-pearl effect, far beyond either description or pictorial representation. A matter-of-fact person has generally much of yellow in his mental body, and his various bands of color are usually regular and in order. He has far less emotion and less imagination than the intuitional man, and, therefore, often in certain ways less power and enthusiasm, but, on the other hand, he is far less likely to make mistakes, and what he does will generally be well and carefully done. It may be noted also that the scientific and orderly habit of mind has a distinct influence upon the arrangement of the colors in the astral body. They tend to fall into regular bands, and the lines of demarcation between them become more definite. In the mental body of an intuitional man there is much more of blue, but the colors are generally vague and the whole body is ill-regulated. He suffers much more than the steadier type, but sometimes through that suffering he is able to make rapid progress. In the perfect man, of course, both the glow and enthusiasm and the steadfastness and regularity have their place. It is merely a question which is required first. In addition to the qualities enumerated above, which are expressed as colors in the mental body, there are a number of other qualities, such as courage, dignity, cheerfulness, truthfulness, and the like, which are represented broadly speaking rather by form than by color. They are indicated by differences in the structure of the mental body, or by changes in its surface. Within the different rings or zones of color described above there are usually to be seen more or less clearly marked striations, and many qualities of the man can be judged by an examination of these striations. The possession of a strong will, for example, brings the whole mental body into far more level definite lines. All striations and radiations are steady, firm, and clearly distinguishable, whereas in the case of a weak and vacillating person this firmness and strength of line would be consequently absent. The lines separating the different qualities would be indeterminate, and the striations would be small, weak, and wavy. Courage is shown by firm and very strongly marked lines, especially in the orange band connected with pride, and by the calm, steadfast shining of the colors indicating the higher qualities. When fear overpowers a person, all the colors are dimmed and overwhelmed by a livid gray mist, and the striations are lost in a quivering mass of palpitating jelly, the man having for the time lost the power of guiding and controlling his vehicles. Dignity also expresses itself principally in the same part of the mental body as that expressing courage, but by a calm steadiness and assuredness which is quite different from the lines of courage. Truthfulness and accuracy are portrayed very clearly by regularity in the striations of the part of the mental body devoted to concrete forms, and by the clearness and correctness of the images which appear there. Loyalty shows itself by an intensification both of affection and devotion, and by the constant formation in that part of the ovoid of figures of the person to whom the loyalty is felt. In many cases of loyalty, affection, and devotion, there is made a very strong permanent image of the object of those feelings, and that remains floating in the aura of the thinker, so that, when his thought turns towards the loved or adored one, the force which he pours out strengthens that already existing image instead of forming a new one as it would normally do. Joy shows itself in a general brightening and radiancy of both the mental and the astral bodies, as also in a peculiar rippling of the surface of the body. Generally, cheerfulness shows itself in a modified bubbling form of this, and also in a steady serenity which is pleasant to see. Surprise, on the other hand, is shown by a sharp constriction of the mental body accompanied by an increased glow in the bands of affection if the surprise is a pleasant one, and by a change of color usually involving the display of a good deal of brown and gray in the lower part of the ovoid when the surprise is an unpleasant one. This constriction is usually communicated to both the astral and the physical bodies, and often causes singularly unpleasant feelings which affect sometimes the solar plexus and sometimes the heart center, in which case it brings palpitation or even death, so that a sudden surprise may occasionally kill one who has a weak heart. Awe is the same as wonder, except that it is accompanied by a profound change in the devotional part of the mental body, which usually swells out under this influence and has its striations more strongly marked. Mystical thought and the presence of psychic faculties are indicated by colors of which there are no equivalents on the physical plane. When a man uses any part of his mental body, directing his thought strongly into one or more of the channels previously mentioned, the mental body not only vibrates for the time more rapidly, thereby brightening in color, but the portion of it which corresponds to that thought usually swells out temporarily and increases in size, so disturbing for a time the symmetry of the ovoid. In many people such bulging is permanent, and that always means that the amount of thought of that type is steadily increasing. If, for example, a person takes up some scientific study, and therefore suddenly turns his thoughts in that direction much more than before, the first effect will be such protuberance as has been described. But if he keeps the amount of his thoughts on scientific subjects at the same level which he has now adopted, the protruding portion will gradually sink back into the general outline of the ovoid, but the band of its color will have become wider than before. If, however, the man's interest in scientific subjects steadily increases in force, the protrusion will still remain in evidence even though the band has widened. Injury may thus be done to the mental body by overspecialization, leading to a lopsided development. It becomes overdeveloped in some parts, and proportionately undeveloped in other regions, perhaps equally important. Harmonious and proportionate all-round development is the object to be sought, and for this is needed a calm self-analysis and a definite direction of means to ends. This aspect of our subject we shall consider further in a later chapter. Reference has already been made to the ceaseless motion of the matter in the mental body. The same phenomenon occurs also in the case of the astral body. When, for example, the astral body is disturbed by a sudden emotion, all the matter is swept about as if by a violent hurricane, so that for the time being the colors become very much mixed. Presently, however, by the specific gravity of the different types of matter, the whole arrangement will sort itself once more into its usual zones. Even then, the matter is by no means at rest, as the particles are all the time running round these zones, though comparatively rarely leaving their own belt and intruding on another. This movement within its own zone is entirely healthy. In fact, one in whom there is no circulation is a mental crustacean, incapable of growth until it bursts its shell. The activity of the matter in any particular zone increases in proportion to the amount of thought devoted to the subject of which it is an expression. Disturbances of the mental body are similar to those in the astral body and are equally disastrous in their effects. Thus, if a man allows himself to be greatly worried over some problem and turns it over and over again in his mind without reaching any conclusion, he sets up a sort of storm in his mental body. Perhaps an even better description would be a sore place in the mental body, like an irritation produced by friction. An argumentative person has his mental body in a state of perpetual inflammation, and the inflammation is liable, on slight provocation, to break out at any moment into an actual sore. For such a one, there is no hope of any kind of occult progress until he has brought balance and common sense to bear on his diseased condition. If a man should permit his thought upon any given subject to stagnate, that stagnation will be reproduced in the matter appropriate to the subject. In this manner, by allowing his thought on that subject to set and solidify, a congestion is set up which appears as a prejudice. A small eddy is formed in which the mental matter runs round and round until it coagulates and becomes a kind of wart. Unless and until this wart is worn away or forcibly rooted out, the man cannot use that particular part of his mental body, and is incapable of rational thought on that subject. The foul thickened mass blocks all free movement either outward or inward. It prevents him, on the one hand, from seeing accurately, and from receiving any reliable new impressions on the matter in question, and on the other, from sending out any clear thought with regard to it. These diseased spots in the mental body are, unfortunately, also centers of infection. The inability to see clearly therefore increases and spreads. Stagnation in one part of the mental body is thus likely to lead to stagnation in other parts also. So that if a man has a prejudice on one subject, he will probably soon develop prejudices on others, because the healthy flow of mental matter has been checked, and the habit of untruth has been formed. Religious prejudice is the commonest and the most serious of all, and completely prevents any approach to rational thought with regard to the subject. A very large number of people have the whole of that part of the mental body which should be occupied with religious matters inactive, ossified and covered with warts, so that even the most rudimentary conception of what religion really is remains utterly impossible for them until a catastrophic change has taken place. In general, we may repeat that in all the best of men of the more advanced races at the present day, the physical body is fully developed and fairly under control. The astral body is also fully developed, but not by any means under perfect control. The mental body is in process of evolution, but its growth is as yet very far from complete. They have a long way to go before these three bodies are entirely subordinate to the soul. When that happens, the lower self will have been absorbed into the higher self, and the ego or soul will have dominated the man. In such a man there is no longer conflict between his various bodies, though he is not yet perfect, yet his different vehicles are so far harmonized that they have but one aim. Chapter 6. Interplay between desire and thought in consciousness. In the astral body we examined kama, or desire, and addressed kamamanas, the entanglement of desire and mind. In this work we must again consider kamamanas, assuming much of what was presented in the astral body. Regarding kama, and focusing primarily on the manas aspect of the subject. Summarizing briefly, kama is the life expressed in the astral vehicle, characterized by feeling, encompassing animal appetites, passions, and desires, representing the ape and tiger within us that most strongly binds us to the earth. Kama or desire is also the reflected lower aspect of Atma or will. Kama is sometimes narrowly interpreted as gross sensual desire, yet it signifies all desire, the outward expression of love, the love for the things of the three worlds, while true love is the love of life or the divine, belonging to the higher, inward-turning self. In the Rig Veda, kama personifies the feeling that drives creation, fundamentally representing the longing for active sentient existence, the vibrant turbulence of passionate life. For the individual as for the cosmos, kama is the primary cause of reincarnation, and as desire differentiates into particular desires, these bind the thinker to earth, returning him repeatedly to rebirth. In the East, this compelling desire that drives man into incarnation is called Thrishna, in Pali, Tanha, and its realization or fulfillment is called Upadana. Manas derives from the Sanskrit root man, meaning to think. It is the thinker within us, vaguely referred to as mind in the West. Manas is the immortal individual, the true self. The thinker, however, as a spiritual entity existing on the higher mental or causal plane, cannot directly contact the lower worlds and thus projects from itself the lower manas, described as a reflection, shadow, or ray. This ray interacts with the brain, manifesting through it the mental powers that the brain, by its structure and physical qualities, can interpret. The ray vibrates the molecules of the brain nerve cells, producing consciousness on the physical plane. The lower manas is enveloped in the quaternary consisting of kama or desire, prana or vitality, the etheric double, and the physical body. It may be seen as holding kama with one hand while maintaining connection to its source, the higher manas. During earthly life, kama and lower manas function together and are often called kamamanas. Kama provides the animal and passional elements, while lower manas rationalizes them and adds intellectual faculties. Together, kamamanas are so interwoven that they rarely operate independently, as almost every thought is influenced by desire. Kamamanas is not a new principle but the union of lower manas with kama, representing manas engaged with external things. The activity of lower manas manifests as mental ability, intellectual strength, acuteness, and subtlety, including comparison, reasoning, judgment, imagination, and other faculties. These can reach what is sometimes called genius, though Helena Petrovna Blavatsky described it as artificial genius, the product of culture and intellectual sharpness. Ordinary mind or intellect is, in her words, a pale and often distorted reflection of manas, with its true nature revealed by the presence of kamic elements such as passion, vanity, and arrogance. True genius consists of higher manas entering lower consciousness, demonstrating faculties such as intuition. Manas is described in the Bindapanishad as twofold, pure and impure, with the impure determined by desire and the pure free from it. Genius that perceives rather than argues belongs to higher manas, and true intuition is one of its abilities. Reason, the process of weighing and balancing facts, drawing conclusions and forming hypotheses, is the function of lower manas through the brain, employing ratiocination, ascending from the known to the unknown by induction, and descending from the unknown to the known by deduction, verifying hypotheses through experiment. There is a difference also in the mechanism of ordinary reasoning and of the peculiar flashes of consciousness known as genius. Reasoning comes to the brain through the successive subplanes of the astral and mental planes step by step, but genius results from the consciousness pouring downwards through the atomic subplanes only, from the atomic astral and the atomic physical. Reason, the faculty of the physical brain, being wholly dependent on the evidence of the senses, cannot be the quality pertaining directly to the divine spirit in man. The latter knows, hence all reasoning, which implies discussion and argument, is useless to it. The spirit or ego speaks through the conscience, which is the instantaneous perception between right and wrong. Hence prophecy and vaticination, and the so-called divine inspiration are simply the effects of the illumination from above by a man's own immortal spirit. Kamamanas is the personal self of man. In Isis Unveiled it is termed the astral soul. It is lower manas that gives the individualizing touch that makes the personality recognize itself as I. It becomes intellectual. It recognizes itself as separate from all other selves. Deluded by the separateness it feels, it does not realize a unity beyond all that it is able to sense. Lower manas, swayed by the rush of kamic emotions, passions and desires, attracted by all material things, blinded and deafened by the storm voices among which it is plunged, is apt to forget the pure and serene glory of its birthplace, and to throw itself into the turbulence which gives rapture but not peace. It is lower manas which gives the last touch of delight to the senses and to the animal nature, for there could be no passion without memory or anticipation, no ecstasy without the subtle force of imagination and the delicate colors of dream and fancy. Kama thus binds lower manas fast to earth. So long as any action is undertaken with the object of obtaining love, recognition, power, or fame, however grand the ambition, however far-reaching the charity, however lofty the achievement, manas is tainted with kama, and is not pure at its source. Kama and manas act and react on each other, each stimulating and arousing the other. The mind is continually impelled by desire, and is made to serve constantly as a minister of pleasure. That which gives pleasure is ever sought by the mind, and it ever seeks to present images that give pleasure and to exclude those that give pain. The mental faculties add to the animal passions a certain strength and quality not apparent in them when they work as purely animal qualities. For the impressions made on the mental body are more permanent than those made on the astral body, and the mental body constantly reproduces them through the agency of memory and imagination. Thus the mental body stimulates the astral, arousing in it the desires that, in the animal, slumber until awakened by a physical stimulus. Hence we find in an undeveloped man a persistent pursuit of sense gratification never found in the lower animals, a lust, a cruelty, a calculation to which they are strangers. Thus the powers of the mind, yoked to the service of the senses, make of man a far more dangerous and savage brute than any animal. The part which is the desire elemental, the instinctive life in the astral body, plays in this entanglement of manas with kama, has already been fully described in the astral body, to which the student is referred. So closely are men's astral and mental bodies intertwined that it is often said they act as a single body. In the Vedantin classification, in fact, the two are classed together as one kosha or sheath, thus, Buddhic body, Anandamayasha, causal body, Vijnanamaya kosha, mental body, astral body, Manomaya kosha, etheric double, dense body, Annamaya kosha. The student will recollect that the centers of sensation are situated in kama. Hence the saying in the Mundaka that the organ of thinking of every creature is pervaded by the senses. This emphasizes the double action of the Manomaya kosha, which is the organ of thinking, but is also pervaded by the senses. We may note here the connection between Kamamanas and the spirally of atoms. In the first round of the earth chain, the first set of spirally of the physical plane atoms were vivified by the life of the monad. This set is used by the currents of prana affecting the dense physical body. In the second round, the second set of spirally become active, the prana connected with the etheric double flowing through them. In the third round, the third set of spirally is vivified, the prana connected to the astral body flowing through them, thus making sensibility possible. In the fourth round, the fourth set of spirally becomes active, the kamamanasic prana flowing through them, thus making them fit to be used for a brain which is to act as the instrument for thought. The vivification of further sets of spirally for the use of the higher consciousness, in the case of those preparing for entering the path, can be brought about by certain yoga practices. In the ordinary course of evolution, a new set of spirally will be developed in each round, so that in the seventh round the entire 7 spirally will be active. Hence, the people who live in that round will find it far easier than people do today to respond to inner things and to live the higher life. In the course of each incarnation, manas may do one of 3 things. It may rise towards its source and by unremitting and strenuous effort become one with its Father in heaven, higher manas. It may partially aspire and partially tend downwards, as indeed is mostly the case with the average man. It may become so clogged with kamic elements as to become one with them, and be forcibly wrenched away from its parent and perish. Whenever lower manas can, for the time being, disconnect itself from kama, it becomes the guide of the highest mental faculties, and is the organ of free will in physical man. The condition of this freedom is that kama shall be subdued and conquered. Free will resides in manas itself. From manas comes the feeling of liberty, the knowledge that we can rule ourselves, that the higher nature can rule the lower, however much that lower nature may rebel and struggle. As soon as the consciousness identifies itself with manas instead of kama, the lower nature becomes the animal which the higher consciousness can bestride, which is no longer the I. Thus the difference between a strong-willed and weak-willed person is that the weak-willed person is moved from outside by outer attractions and repulsions, by desire, which is will discrowned, while the strong-willed man is moved from inside by pure will, continually mastering external circumstances by bringing to bear upon them appropriate forces, guided by his store of experiences. Further, as lower manas frees itself from kama, it becomes more and more capable of transmitting to the lower consciousness impulses received from higher manas. And then, as we have seen, genius flashes forth, the light from the ego streaming through lower manas into the brain. Of this we may be sure. So long as we are in the vortex of the personality, so long as the storms and desires and appetites surge around us, so long as we are tossed to and fro on waves of emotion, so long the voice of the higher manas or ego cannot reach our ears. The mandate of the ego comes not in the fire or the whirlwind, not in the thunderclap or the storm, but only when there has fallen the stillness of a silence that can be felt, only when the very air is motionless and the calm is profound, only when the man wraps his face in a mantle which closes his ear even to the silence that is of the earth. Then only sounds the voice that is stiller than silence, the voice of his true higher self, or ego, as an unruffled lake mirrors the moon and stars, but, when ruffled by a passing breeze yields only broken reflections, so may a man, steadying his mind, calming his desires, imposing stillness on his activities, reproduce within himself the image of the higher. Even so may the disciple mirror the mind of his master. But if his own thoughts spring up, his own desires arise, he will have broken reflections, dancing lights, that tell him nothing. In the words of a master, it is upon the serene and placid surface of the unruffled mind that the visions gathered from the invisible find a representation in the visible world. It is with jealous care we have to guard our mind plane from all the adverse influences which daily arise in our passage through earth life. The ego, as part of the universal mind, is unconditionally omniscient on its own plane, but only potentially so in the lower worlds because it has to work through the medium of the personal self. The causal body is the vehicle of all knowledge, past, present, and future, and it is from this fountainhead that its double lower manas catches occasional glimpses of that which is beyond the senses of man, and transmits them to certain brain cells, thus making the man a seer, a soothsayer, and a prophet. This triumph can be gained only by many successive incarnations, all consciously directed towards this end. As life succeeds life, the physical body becomes more and more delicately attuned to the vibrations of the manasic impulses, so that the lower manas needs less and less of the coarser astral matter as its vehicle. It is part of the mission of the manasic ray, lower manas, gradually to get rid of blind deceptive element which brings it so closely into contact with matter as entirely to becloud its divine nature and stultify its intuitions. When at last the mastery of kama is achieved, and the body is responsive to manas, lower manas becomes one with its source, higher manas, this in Christian terminology, is the Father in heaven becoming one with the Son on all planes, as they always have been one in heaven. This, of course, is a very advanced stage, being that of an adept, for whom incarnation is no longer necessary though it may be voluntarily undertaken. Hence that great statement in the Mundakopanishad, the organ of thinking is pervaded by the senses, that organ purified, Atma manifests itself. With most people, lower manas partially aspires and partially tends downwards. The normal experience of the average man is that life is a battlefield, manas continually wrestling with kama. Sometimes aspiration conquers, the chains of sense are broken, and lower manas soars upwards. At other times kama wins and chains lower manas down to earth. It thus appears, as was briefly indicated in Chapter 4, that for most people the center of consciousness is embedded in kama manas. But the more cultured and developed are beginning to govern desire by reason. The center of consciousness is gradually transferring itself from the higher astral to the lower mental. As men progress, it will move further up still, men being dominated by principle, rather than by interest and desire. For, ultimately, man's intellect demands that his surroundings, both of life and matter, shall be intelligible. His mind demands order, rationality, logical explanation. Cannot live in a chaos without suffering, it must know and understand, if it is to exist in peace. In extreme cases lower manas becomes entangled so inextricably with kama that the slender link which unites the higher to the lower manas, the silver thread that binds it to the master, snaps in two. Then, even during earth life, the higher nature being severed wholly from the lower, the human being is rent in twain. The brute has broken free, and it goes forth unbridled, carrying with it the reflections of Manas, which should have been its guide through life. Such a being, human in form but brute in nature, may now and then be met with in the haunts of men, putrescent while still living, a thing to shudder at, even though with pity. After physical death, such an astral body is an entity of terrible potency, and is known as an elementary, a description of it being in the astral body. From the point of view of the ego, there has been no harvest of useful experience from that personality. The ray has brought nothing back. The lower life has been a total and complete failure. In the voice of the silence is contained the following injunction. Let not thy heaven-born, merged in the sea of Maya, break from the universal parent, but let the fiery power retire into the inmost chamber of the heart, and the abode of the world's mother. The heaven-born is Chit, the lower mind. It is born from the soul above, when Manas becomes dual in incarnation. The planes of Atmabuddhimanas are typified by heaven, while those of the personality are spoken of as earth. It is the presence in man of the heaven-born that confers on him some freedom, and because he has this liberty and power to go his own way, his life is usually more disorderly, less regulated, than that of the lower kingdoms of external nature. Even with most people, some of their mental matter has become so entangled with their astral matter that it is impossible for it to be entirely freed after death. The result of the struggle between their kama and their manas, therefore, is that some portion of the mental matter, and even of causal matter, is retained in the astral body after the ego has completely broken away from it. If, on the other hand, a man has during life completely conquered his lower desires and succeeded in completely freeing the lower mind from desire, there is practically no struggle, and the ego is able to withdraw not only all that he invested in that particular incarnation, but also all the interest, the experiences, faculties, etc. that have been acquired. Chapter 7. Mechanisms of Thought Wave Generation and Impact. When a man employs his mental body in thought, a vibration arises within it, producing two distinct effects. The first effect involves radiating vibrations or waves, which will be addressed in this chapter, while the second effect, the formation of thought forms, will be considered later. A vibration in the mental body, like all vibrations, tends to propagate itself to any surrounding matter capable of receiving it, much as the vibration of a bell transmits to the surrounding air. Since the atmosphere is permeated with mental matter that readily responds to such impulses, a ripple or vibrating shell forms within the matter of the plane, spreading through space in a manner similar to the ripples generated when a stone is dropped into a pond, radiating outward from the point of impact. Unlike a ripple on a surface, a mental impulse radiates in multiple dimensions, resembling the rays from the sun or a lamp, intersecting in all directions without interference, akin to rays of light on the physical plane. The expanding sphere of vibrations is opalescent and multicolored, though the colors diminish as they extend outward. Furthermore, the mental vibration tends to reproduce itself whenever the opportunity arises. When a thought wave encounters another mental body, it induces vibrations similar to those that generated it, leading the recipient to produce a thought resembling that of the originator. The strength of the thought wave diminishes with distance, likely in proportion to the cube of the distance due to the additional dimension involved, yet these vibrations lose energy much more slowly than those in physical matter, becoming imperceptible only at great distances. The reach, intensity, and persistence of a thought wave depend on the strength and clarity of the originating thought, with clarity and precision outweighing mere intensity. Additional factors influencing the wave's propagation include its nature and the resistance it encounters. Waves in lower astral matter are often quickly deflected or overwhelmed by numerous similar vibrations, much like a soft sound is drowned amid city noise. Consequently, ordinary self-centered thoughts, originating at the lowest mental levels and immediately descending to corresponding astral levels, are relatively ineffective. Their power is limited in both worlds because they are lost within the vast sea of similar thoughts. Conversely, thoughts generated at higher levels encounter a clearer field, as the number of such waves is small. Theosophical thought, in particular, is almost unique in this respect. While other religious thoughts may be elevated, they rarely attain comparable precision, and scientific thought seldom matches the clarity of theosophical thought, leaving a practically clear field for its propagation. Theosophical thought acts like a sound in profound silence, activating a level of mental matter seldom utilized, with its radiations impacting the mental body of the average person where it remains largely dormant. Hence, it tends to awaken an entirely new part of the thinking apparatus. Such a wave does not, of course, necessarily convey theosophical thought to those who are ignorant of it, but in awakening the higher portion of the mental body it tends to elevate and liberalize the man's thought as a whole, along whatever lines it may be in the habit of moving. There is, of course, an infinite variety of thoughts. If the thought is perfectly simple, there will be in the mental body only the one rate of vibration, and consequently only one type of mental matter will be strongly affected. The mental body, as we have seen, consists of matter of the four lower subplanes of the mental plane, and in each of these subplanes there are many subdivisions of varying densities. If a man is already deeply engrossed in some other line of thought, a strong wave of thought may sweep past him without affecting him, precisely as a man already occupied in business or pleasure may not hear the voice of another speaker. As, however, large numbers of men do not think definitely or strongly except when in immediate prosecution of some business which demands their whole attention, they are likely at other times to be considerably affected by the thoughts which impinge upon them. Hence, great responsibility rests upon everyone who thinks, because his thoughts, especially if strong and clear, will inevitably affect large numbers of other people. It is not too much to say that one who harbors impure or evil thoughts thereby spreads moral contagion among his fellow men. Bearing in mind that large numbers of people have within them latent germs of evil, germs which may never bear fruit unless some force from without plays upon them and stirs them into activity, the thought wave sent out by an impure or unholy thought may be the very factor which awakens a germ into activity and causes it to begin to grow. Hence, such a thought may start some soul upon a downward career. This man may in a similar manner affect many others, and so the evil spreads and ramifies in countless directions. Much harm is constantly done in this way, and although it may be done unconsciously, yet the perpetrator of the evil is karmically responsible for what he has done. It is, of course, equally true that a beneficent thought may affect others for good in a similar manner. Hence, a man who realizes this may set himself to work to be a veritable sun, constantly radiating upon all his friends and neighbors thoughts of love, calm, peace, etc. Very few realize how great a force for good they may thus wield, if they choose, through the power of thought. It often happens that a man is unable to help another man physically. In fact, the physical presence of the would-be helper may be even distasteful to the sufferer. His physical brain may be closed to suggestions by prejudice or by religious bigotry. But his astral and mental bodies are far more easily impressible than the physical, and it is always possible to approach these by a wave of helpful thought, affection, soothing feeling, and so on. There are many cases where the best will in the world can do nothing physically, but there is no conceivable case in which either in the mental or astral world some relief cannot be given by steady, concentrated, loving thought. It should be noted that a thought wave does not convey a definite, complete idea, but rather tends to produce a thought of the same character as itself. Thus, for example, if the thought be one of devotion, its vibrations will excite devotion, but the object of the worship may be different in the case of each person upon whose mental body the thought wave impinges. A thought wave or vibration thus conveys the character of the thought, but not its subject. If a Hindu sits wrapped in devotion to Krishna, the thought waves which pour forth from him stimulate devotion in all those who come under their influence, though in the case of a Muslim, that devotion to Allah, while for the Zoroastrian it is to Ahura-Mazda, or for the Christian to Jesus. If such a thought wave touches the mental body of a materialist, to whom the very idea of devotion in any form is unknown, even then it produces an elevating effect, its tendency being to stir a higher part of his mental body into some sort of activity, though it cannot create a type of undulation to which the man is wholly unaccustomed. A point of great importance, of which the student should take careful note, is that a man who habitually thinks pure, good and strong thoughts is utilizing for that purpose the higher part of his mental body, a part which is not used at all by the ordinary man, and is entirely undeveloped in him. Such a one is, therefore, a power for good in the world, and is being of great use to all those of his neighbors who are capable of any sort of response. For the vibrations which he sends out tend to arouse a new and higher part of their mental bodies, and consequently to open before them altogether new fields of thought. We may take the matter a little further still. A man who day by day is definitely and carefully thinking is not only improving his own thinking powers and sending out helpful thought waves into the world around him, but he is also developing and improving mental matter itself. For the amount of consciousness which can be brought into the brain is obviously determined by the degree to which the atoms of matter can respond to the number of spirili in the atoms which are vivified and active. Normally, in the ordinary physical atom at the present stage of evolution, there are 4 of these 7 spirili active. The man who is capable of higher forms of thought is helping to develop further spirili in the atoms, and, as these atoms are continually passing in and out of his bodies, they are available for absorption and use by any other person who is capable of using them. High thinking thus helps the world's consciousness by improving the very materials of thought. There are thus many varieties of mental matter, and it is found that each variety has its own special and appropriate rate of vibration, to which it is most accustomed and to which it most readily responds. A complex thought may, of course, affect many varieties of mental matter simultaneously. The general principle underlying the effect of thought on the mental body, as we saw in Chapter 3, is that evil or selfish thoughts are always comparatively slow vibrations of the coarser matter, while good, unselfish thoughts are the more rapid undulations which play only in the finer matter. The power of the united thought of a number of people is always far greater than the sum of their separate thoughts. It would be much more nearly represented by their product. Hence, it is exceedingly beneficial for any city or community that there should be constantly meeting in its midst a number of people who are capable of generating thoughts at a high level. Chapter 8. Creation and Projection of Thought Forms. We now turn to the second effect produced when a man employs his mental body in thought, the formation of thought forms. As observed, a thought generates a set of vibrations within the mental body. Under this impulse, the mental body projects a vibrating portion of itself shaped by the character of the vibrations, similar to fine particles on a disc assuming form when the disc vibrates to a musical note. The mental matter thus projected attracts from the surrounding atmosphere elemental essence of the mental world of the corresponding type, setting that essence into vibration in harmony with its own rhythm. In this way, a thought form is produced, pure and distinct. Such a mental thought form resembles an astral or emotional form but is far more radiant, vividly colored, stronger, more enduring, and more fully vitalized. The effect of thought produces vibrations that shape the matter of the plane into thought forms, giving rise to exquisite, ever-changing colors, waves of varying shades like the rainbow hues in mother of pearl, etherealized and brilliantly intensified, sweeping through each form so that every form presents a harmony of luminous, delicate, and living colors, including many unknown on earth. Words cannot convey the extraordinary beauty and radiance of this subtle matter, instinct with life and motion. Every seer, whether Hindu, Buddhist, or Christian, has witnessed it and speaks in rapturous terms of its splendor, while acknowledging the impossibility of describing it, for language inevitably diminishes its effect. A thought form is a temporary living entity of intense activity, animated by the idea that produced it. When composed of finer matter, it possesses great power and energy, and can serve as a potent instrument when directed by a strong and steady will, the details of which will be addressed later. The elemental essence is a semi-intelligent life that vivifies the matter of the mental plane, responding readily to human thought, so that every impulse from the mental body immediately assumes a temporary vehicle of this essence. It is even more immediately sensitive to thought than astral elemental essence, yet it differs significantly, forming a chain behind the latter, so its force cannot operate in precisely the same concentrated manner, constantly darting from one thing to another and influencing wandering thoughts. A thought thus becomes for the time a living entity, the thought force acting as the soul and the elemental essence as the body. These thought forms are known as elementals or sometimes artificial elementals. The principles underlying the production of all thought forms are: quality of thought determines color, nature of thought determines form, definiteness of thought determines clearness of outline. Thought forms may be of infinite variety, both as to color and shape. With the various colors and their significance the student will now be familiar, as they are in agreement with those existing in the astral and mental bodies as described in the astral body and also in an earlier chapter of this book. Thus, for example, affection produces a glowing rose color, a wish to heal, a lovely silvery white, a mental effort to steady and strengthen the mind, a beautiful flashing golden yellow. Yellow in any of the vehicles always indicates intellect, but its shades vary much, and it may be complicated by the admixture of other colors. Generally speaking, it has a deeper and duller tint if it is directed to the lower channels, more especially if the objects are selfish. In the astral or mental body of an average man of business, it would show itself as yellow ochre, while pure intellect devoted to the study of philosophy or mathematics appears frequently as golden. This rises gradually to a beautiful clear and luminous primrose yellow when a powerful intellect is employed absolutely unselfishly for the benefit of humanity. Most yellow thought forms are clearly outlined, a vague cloud of yellow being comparatively rare. It indicates intellectual pleasure such as appreciation of the result of ingenuity or the delight in clever craftsmanship. A cloud of this nature betokens the entire absence of any personal emotion, for if that were present it would inevitably tinge the yellow with its appropriate color. In many cases, Thought forms are merely revolving clouds of the color appropriate to the idea which gave them birth. The student will realize that, at the present stage of humanity, there is a vast preponderance of cloudy and irregularly shaped thoughts, the product of ill-trained minds of the majority. It is among the rarest of phenomena to see clear and definite forms among the thousands that float about us. Where a thought is definite, a form is created, and a clear-cut and often beautiful shape is assumed. Such shapes, while of infinite variety, are often in some way typical of the kind of thought which they express. Abstract ideas usually represent themselves by all kinds of perfect and most beautiful geometrical forms. It should be remembered in this connection that the merest abstractions to us down here become definite facts on the mental plane. The strength of thought and emotion determines the size of the thought form as well as its duration as a separate entity. Its duration depends upon the nutriment supplied to it after its generation by the repetition of the thought, either by its originator or by others. If the thought be intellectual and impersonal, if the thinker is attempting to solve a problem in algebra or geometry, then his thought forms will be confined to the mental plane. If his thought is of a spiritual nature, if it be tinged with love and aspiration of deep, unselfish feeling, then it will rise upwards from the mental plane and will borrow much of the splendor and glory of the Buddhic levels above. In such a case, its influence is most powerful, and every such thought is a mighty force for good. If, on the other hand, the thought has in it something of self or personal desire, at once its vibrations turn downwards, and it draws round itself a body of astral matter in addition to its clothing of mental matter. Such a thought form, which would be termed more accurately a thought-emotion form, is, of course, capable of affecting both the mental and the astral bodies of other men. This type of thought form is by far the most common, as few thoughts of ordinary men and women are untinged with desire, passion, or emotion. We may consider this class of thought forms as generated by the activity of kama manas, by mind dominated by desire. When a man thinks of any concrete object, a book, a house, a landscape, he builds a tiny image of the object in the matter of his mental body. This image floats in the upper part of that body, usually in front of the face of the man and at about the level of the eye. It remains there as long as the man is contemplating the object, and usually for a little time afterwards, the length of time depending upon the intensity and the clearness of thought. This form is quite objective and can be seen by another person possessed of mental clairvoyance. If a man thinks of another person, he creates a tiny portrait in just the same way. The same result follows any effort of the imagination. The painter who forms a conception of his future picture builds it up out of the matter of his mental body, and then projects it into space in front of him, keeps it before his mind's eye, and copies it. The novelist, in the same way, builds images of his characters in mental matter, and by the exercise of his will moves these puppets from one position or grouping to another, so that the plot of the story is literally acted out before him. As already said, these mental images are so entirely objective that they may not only be seen by a clairvoyant, but they can even be moved about and rearranged by someone other than their creator. Thus, for example, playful nature spirits, or more often a dead novelist, watching the work of his fellow author, will move the images or puppets about so that they seem to their creator to have developed a will of their own, the plot of the story thus working out on lines quite different from those originally intended by the author. A sculptor makes a strong thought form of the statue he intends to create, plants it in his block of marble, and then proceeds to cut away the marble which lies outside the thought form until only that portion of it which it interpenetrated by the thought form remains. Similarly, A lecturer, as he thinks earnestly of the different parts of his subject, makes a series of thought forms, usually strong ones, because of the effort. If he fails to make his audience understand him, it must be largely because his own thought is not sufficiently clear-cut. A clumsy and indefinite thought form makes but a slight impression, and even that with difficulty, whilst a clearly cut one forces the mental bodies of the audience to try to reproduce it. Hypnotism provides examples of the objectivity of thought forms. It is well known that the thought form of an idea may be projected onto a blank paper, and there become visible to a hypnotized person. Or it may be made so objective that the hypnotized person will see and feel it as though it were an actual physical object. Many thought forms exist, more or less permanently, of characters from history, drama, fiction, etc. Thus, for example, popular fancy has strongly depicted characters and scenes from the plays of Shakespeare, from Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, from fairy stories such as Cinderella, Aladdin's lamp, etc. Such thought forms are collective, having coalesced from the products of the imagination of countless individuals. Children have vivid and capable imaginations, so books read by them are usually well represented in the world of thought forms. Many excellent and lifelike portraits existing of Sherlock Holmes, Captain Kettle, Dr. Nicola, and many others. On the whole, however, the thought forms evoked from the novels of today are by no means as clear as those which our forefathers made of Robinson Crusoe or of the characters of Shakespeare's plays. This, of course, is because people today read more superficially and with less serious attention than was the case formerly. So much for the genesis of thought forms. We pass now to consider their effects on their creators and on others. Each man, as he moves through life, produces three classes of thought forms. Those which, being neither centered round the thinker nor specially aimed at any person, are left behind him as a sort of trail which marks his route. Those which, being centered round the thinker, hover round him and follow him wherever he goes. Those which shoot straight out away from the thinker, aiming at a finite object. A thought form of class 1, being neither definitely personal nor specially aimed at someone else, simply floats detached in the atmosphere, all the time radiating vibrations similar to those originally sent forth by its creator. If the form does not come in contact with any other mental body, the radiation gradually exhausts its store of energy, and in that case the form falls to pieces. But if it succeeds in awakening sympathetic vibrations in any mental body near at hand, an attraction is set up and the thought form is usually absorbed by that mental body. At the present stage of evolution, the majority of the thoughts of men are usually self-centered even when they are not actively selfish. Such self-centered thoughts hang about the thinker. Most men, in fact, surround their mental bodies with a shell of such thoughts. They hover ceaselessly about them and constantly react on them. Their tendency is to reproduce themselves, to stir up in the man a repetition of the thoughts which he had previously entertained. Many a man feels this pressure upon him from within, this constant suggestion of certain thoughts, especially when he is resting after his labors, and there is no definite thought in his mind. If the thoughts are evil, he frequently thinks of them as tempting demons goading him into sin. Yet they are none the less entirely his own creation. He is his own tempter. Repeated thoughts of this kind play an important part in working out what is called prarabdha or ripe karma. Persistent reiteration of thoughts of the same kind, say of revenge, bring a man at last to a point which may be compared to that of a saturated solution. Just as the addition of further matter of the same kind to the solution will produce the solidification of the whole, so will a slight additional impulse result in the commission of a crime. Similarly, reiterated thoughts of helping others may, when the stimulus of opportunity touches the man, crystallize out as an act of heroism. Under such circumstances, a man may marvel at his own commission of a crime or at his own performance of some heroic act of self-sacrifice, not realizing that repeated thought had made the action inevitable. A consideration of these facts goes far towards explaining the old problem of free will and necessity or destiny. Furthermore, a man's thought forms tend to draw towards the man the thought forms of others of a similar nature. A man may thus attract to himself large reinforcements of energy from outside. It lies within himself, of course, whether these forces that he draws into himself be of a good or evil kind. Usually each definite thought creates a new thought form, but if a thought form of the same nature is already hovering round the thinker, under certain circumstances a new thought on the same subject, instead of creating a new form, coalesces with and strengthens the old one, so that by long brooding over the same subject a man may sometimes create a thought form of tremendous power. If the thought be an evil one, such a thought form may become a veritable malign influence lasting perhaps for many years, and having for a time all the appearance and powers of a real living entity. A shell of self-centered thought obviously must tend to obscure the mental vision and facilitate the formation of prejudice. Through such a shell the man looks out upon the world, naturally seeing everything tinged with its predominant colors. Everything which reaches him from without is thus more or less modified by the character of the shell. Thus, until a man has complete control of thought and feeling he see nothing as it really is, since all his observations must be made through this medium which, like a badly made glass, distorts and colors everything. It was for this reason that Aryasanga said in the voice of the silence that the mind was the great slayer of the real. He was drawing attention to the fact that we do not see any object as it is, but only the images that we are able to make of it, everything being thus necessarily colored for us by these thought forms of our own creation. If a man's thought of another is merely contemplative and involves no feeling or desire, the thought does not usually perceptibly affect the man whom he thinks. If, however, there is feeling, affection, associated with the thought form, built out of matter of the thinker's mental body, and this astramental form leaps out of the body in which it has been generated, goes straight towards the object of the feeling, and fastens itself upon him. It may be compared to a Leyden jar. The form of elemental essence corresponds to the Leyden jar, and the thought energy to the charge of electricity. If the man is at the moment in a passive condition, or if he has within him active vibrations of a character harmonious with those of the thought form will at once discharge itself upon him, and in the act cease to exist. The effect is to provoke a vibration similar to its own, if none such already exists, or to intensify it if it is already to be found there. If the man's mind is so strongly occupied along other lines that it is impossible for the vibration to find an entrance, the thought form hovers about him waiting for an opportunity to discharge itself. A thought form sent from one person to another thus involves the actual transference of a certain amount both of force and of matter from the sender to the recipient. The difference between the effect of a thought wave and that of a thought form is that the thought wave, as we saw in Chapter 7, does not produce a definite complete idea, but tends to produce a thought as the same character as itself. A thought wave is thus much less definite in its action, but reaches a far wider circle. A thought form, on the other hand, does convey a definite complete idea, transferring the exact nature of the thought to those prepared to receive it, but it can reach only one person at a time. Thus a thought wave is eminently adaptable. A wave of devotion, for example, would tend to arouse devotion in the recipient, although the object of the devotion might be quite different in the case of the sender and the receiver. But a thought form would give rise to a precise image of the being for whom the devotion was originally felt. If the thought is sufficiently strong, distance makes absolutely no difference to the thought form, but the thought of an ordinary person is usually weak and diffused, and is, therefore, not effective outside a limited area. A thought form, say of love or of desire to protect, directed strongly towards another person, goes to the person thought of, and remains in his aura as a shielding and protecting agent. It will seek all opportunities to serve, and all opportunities to defend, not by a conscious and deliberate action but by a blind following out of impulse impressed upon it, and it will strengthen friendly forces that impinge on the aura and weaken unfriendly ones. Thus are created and maintained veritable guardian angels round those we love. Many a mother's prayer for a distant child thus circles round him, acting in the manner described. A knowledge of these facts should make us conscious of the enormous power placed in our hands. We may repeat here what was said when we were dealing with thought waves, that there are many cases where we may not be able to do anything for a man on the physical plane. The man's mental bodies, however, can be affected, and they are frequently more easily impressible than his physical body. Hence, it is always open to us to affect his mental or astral body by helpful thought, affectionate feeling, etc. The laws of thought being what they are, it is certain that results must accrue. There is no possibility of failure, even though no obvious consequence may follow on the physical plane. The student will readily perceive that a thought form can affect another person only if in the aura of that person there are materials capable of responding sympathetically to the vibration of the thought form. In cases where the vibrations of the thought form are outside the limits within which the person's aura is capable of vibrating, the thought form rebounds from it, and that with a force proportional to the energy with which it impinged upon it. Hence the saying that a pure mind and heart are the best protection against inimical assaults, for a pure mind and heart will construct mental and astral bodies of fine and subtle materials, and these bodies cannot respond to vibrations that demand coarse and dense matter. If an evil thought, projected with malefic intent, strikes such a purified body, it will rebound and fly back along the magnetic line of least resistance, returning to and striking its projector. He, having matter in his mental and astral bodies similar to that of the thought form he generated, is thrown into respondent vibrations, and suffers the destructive effects he had intended to cause another. Thus curses come home to roost. From this arise also the very serious effects of hating or suspecting a good and highly advanced man. The thought forms sent against him cannot injure him, and they rebound against their projectors, shattering them mentally, morally, or physically. Whenas man thinks of himself as in some distant place, or wishes earnestly to be there, the thought form, which he makes in his own image, appears in that place. Not infrequently such a form has been seen by others, and has sometimes been mistaken for the astral body or apparition of the man himself. To make this possible, either the seer must have sufficient clairvoyance for the time to be able to see the thought form, or the thought form must have sufficient strength to materialize itself, to draw round itself temporarily a certain amount of physical matter. The thought which generates such a form must necessarily be a strong one, and it therefore employs a large proportion of the matter of the mental body, so that though the form is small and compressed when it leaves the thinker, it usually expands to life-size before it appears at its destination. Furthermore, a thought form such as this, which must essentially be composed of mental matter, in very many cases will also draw around itself a considerable amount of astral matter. In taking on the astral form, the mental elemental loses much of its brilliance, though its glowing color may still be plainly visible inside the shell of lower matter which it assumes. Just as the original thought ensouls the elemental essence of the mental plane, so the same thought, plus its form as a mental elemental, acts as the soul of the astral elemental. None of the consciousness of the thinker would be included in a thought form such as that just described. When once sent out from him, it would normally be quite a separate entity, not, indeed, entirely unconnected with its creator, but practically so as far as the possibility of receiving any impression through it is concerned. There is, however, a type of clairvoyance rather more advanced than ordinary clairvoyance, necessitating a certain amount of control upon the mental plane. It is necessary to retain so much hold over a newly created thought form as will render it possible to receive impressions by means of it. Such impressions as were made upon the form would be transmitted to the thinker by sympathetic vibration. In a perfect case of this kind of clairvoyance, it is almost as though the seer projected a part of his consciousness into the thought form and used it as a kind of outpost from which observation was possible. He is able to see almost as well as he would if he himself stood in the place of his thought form. The figures at which he is looking will appear to him as of life-size and close at hand, and he will find it possible to shift his point of view if he wishes to do so. Everyone who can think at all exercises the power to create thought forms. Thoughts are things, and very puissant things. Every one of us is generating thought forms unceasingly night and day. Our thoughts, as many might suppose, are not exclusively our own business. Evil thoughts, in fact, reach much further than evil words, and may affect any other persons who already have germs of evil in them. As a master has written, man is continually peopling his current in space with a world of his own, crowded with the offspring of his fancies, desires, impulses, and passions. A master has also written of the adept being able to project into and materialize in the visible world the forms that his imagination has constructed out of inert cosmic matter in the invisible world. The adept does not create anything new, but only utilizes and manipulates materials which nature has in store around him, and material which, throughout eternities, has passed through all forms. He has but to choose the one he wants and recall it into objective existence. The difference between an undeveloped and a developed man is that the developed man uses thought power consciously. When such a man can consciously create and direct a thought form, his powers of usefulness obviously very largely increase, for he can use the thought form to work in places which, at the moment, he cannot conveniently visit in his mental body. He can thus watch and guide his thought forms and make them the agents of his will. Perhaps the supreme example of a thought form is that known in the Christian Church as the angel of the presence. This is not a member of the kingdom of the angels, but a thought form of the Christ, wearing his likeness and being an extension of the consciousness of the Christ himself. It is by means of the angel of the presence that is made the change in the elements known as transubstantiation. A similar phenomenon occurs, though at a less high level, in Masonic lodges where a portrait of the highest officer of all time is used. So fully is this thought form a part of himself that the lodge has the benefit of his presence and his blessing just as though he stood there in physical form. It is possible, by an exertion of willpower, instantly to dissipate an artificial elemental or thought form, just as it is possible on the physical plane to kill a poisonous snake in order that it may do no further harm. Neither course of action, however, would commend itself to an occultist except in very unusual circumstances. In order to make clear the reason of this, some little explanation regarding the elemental essence is necessary. Elemental essence, out of which a thought form is constructed, is, as we have already seen, evolving on its own account. It is learning to vibrate at all possible rates. When therefore a thought holds it for a time vibrating at a certain rate, it is helped to this extent so that next time a similar vibration strikes it, it will respond more readily than before. Whether the thought ensouling it is evil or good makes no difference whatever to the essence. All that is required for its development is to be used by thought of some kind. The difference between the good and the evil in the would be shown by the quality of essence which was affected. An evil thought or desire needing for its expression the coarser matter, a higher thought or desire requiring finer matter. Thus by degrees mental elemental essence is being evolved, through the action on it of the thoughts of men, nature spirits, devas, and even animals so far as they do think. For this reason, therefore, lest he should in any way impede its evolution, the occultist avoids when possible the destruction of an artificial elemental, preferring rather to defend himself or others against it by using the protection of a shell. The student should not, of course, imagine it is his duty to think coarse thoughts in order to help the evolution of the coarser types of essence. There are plenty of undeveloped people always thinking the coarser, lower thoughts. The occultist should strive ever to think high and pure thoughts and thus aid the evolution of the finer elemental matter, thus working in a field where there are as yet few laborers. Before leaving this subject of thought forms, we should note that every sound makes its impression upon astral and mental matter, not only what we call musical sounds, but every kind of sound. Some of these were described in the astral body, chapter 8. The thought form edifice built up on the higher planes during the celebration of the Christian Eucharist differs somewhat from ordinary thought forms, though it has much in common with forms created by music. It consists of a higher plane structure composed of the materials provided by the priest and his congregation during the earlier part of the service at the etheric, astral and mental levels, matter of still higher levels being introduced in the later portion of the service, chiefly from the angelic host. The thought edifice may be compared to the condenser in a plant for the distillation of water. The steam is cooled and condensed into water in the cooling chamber. Similarly, the Eucharistic edifice provides a vehicle for the collection and condensation of the materials provided by the worshippers, into which an especial outpouring of the divine force from the very highest levels may descend, and which may enable the angel helpers to use that force for certain definite purposes in the physical world. The ceremonies of all great religions aim at producing such results by some sort of common action. The ceremonies of Freemasonry attain a similar object, though in a different way. The thought form built up by a Masonic ceremony is the real celestial canopy, which may also be regarded as the aura of a man lying on his back. This symbolism appears elsewhere as, for example, in Joseph's coat of many colors, in the robe of glory which the initiate puts on, and also in the ogoids of the Greek philosophers, the glorified body in which the soul of man dwells in the subtle invisible world. Chapter 9. Influence of thought forms on creators and others. Before proceeding to consider the phenomenon of thought transference and its effects on men, it will be convenient first to describe the mechanism by means of which thought is transmitted from one person to another. The term telepathy means literally feeling at a distance, and might, therefore, have been appropriately confined to the transmission of feelings and emotions. It is, however, now generally used almost synonymously with thought transference, and may be taken to cover any transfer of an image, thought, or feeling from one person to another by non-physical means. There are three possibilities in telepathy. There may be direct communication between two etheric brains, two astral bodies, two mental bodies. In the first method, which we may call the physical or etheric method, a thought causes vibrations first in the mental body, then in the astral body, then in the etheric brain, and finally in the dense molecules of the physical brain. By the brain vibrations, the physical ether is affected and the waves pass outwards till they reach another brain, where they set up vibrations in its etheric and dense particles. These vibrations in the receiving brain are then transmitted to the astral and mental bodies attached to it, and so reach the consciousness. If a person thinks strongly of a concrete form in the physical brain, he makes the form in etheric matter. In the effort of making the image, he also sends out etheric waves in every direction. It is not the image itself which is sent out, but a set of vibrations which will reproduce the image. The process is somewhat analogous to the telephone, where the voice itself is not conveyed, but a number of electrical vibrations are set up by the voice, which when they enter the receiver are converted once more into the sounds of the voice. The pineal gland is the organ of thought transference, just as the eye is the organ of vision. The pineal gland in most people is rudimentary, but it is evolving, not retrograding, and it is possible to quicken its evolution so that it can perform its proper function, the function which, in the future, it will discharge in all. If anyone thinks very intently on a single idea with concentration and sustained attention, he will become conscious of a slight quiver or creeping feeling. It has been compared to the creeping of an ant in the pineal gland. The quiver takes place in the ether which permeates the gland and causes a slight magnetic current which gives rise to the creeping feeling in the dense molecules of the gland. If the thought be strong enough to cause the current, then the thinker knows that he has been successful in bringing his thought to a pointedness and a strength which render it capable of being transmitted. The vibration in the ether of the pineal gland sets up waves in the surrounding ether like waves of light, only much smaller and more rapid. These vibrations pass out in all directions, setting the ether in motion, and these etheric waves in turn produce vibrations in the ether of the pineal gland in another brain, and from that are transmitted to the astral and mental bodies in regular succession, as previously described, thus reaching consciousness. If the second pineal gland cannot reproduce the undulations, then the thought will pass unnoticed, making no impression, any more than waves of light make an impression on the eye of a blind man. In the second, or astral method of thought transference, the etheric brain does not enter into the process at all, the communication being direct from one astral body to another. In the third, or mental method, the thinker, having created a thought on the mental plane, does not send it down to the brain but directs it immediately to the mental body of another thinker. The power to do this deliberately implies a far higher mental evolution than does the physical method of thought transference, for the sender must be self-conscious on the mental plane in order to exercise knowingly this activity. When mankind is more evolved, this will probably be the common method of communication. It is already employed by the masters in the instruction of their pupils, and in this way they can convey with ease the most complicated ideas. Chapter 10. Unintentional Transmission of Mental Energies. In chapters 7 and 8 we examined the generation of thought waves and thought forms, and to some degree their effects on others. The latter aspect is sufficiently important to warrant further discussion. We first consider thought transference that is wholly or partially unconscious. From previous observations, it is evident that every person leaves a trail of thoughts wherever he goes. As we walk along a street, for instance, we move through a sea of others' thoughts, the atmosphere filled with vague and indeterminate impressions. If a person's mind remains momentarily vacant, These residual thoughts drift through it, usually leaving little effect but occasionally influencing it significantly. At times, a thought captures the mind's attention, which seizes upon it, temporarily makes it its own, strengthens it with additional force, and then projects it outward to affect another. A person is therefore not responsible for a thought that merely enters his mind, as it may originate elsewhere, yet he is accountable if he adopts it, dwells upon it, and transmits it further strengthened. Such a mixture of thoughts from multiple sources lacks definite coherence, though anyone may initiate a sequence of associated ideas, prompting independent thinking. Many individuals, if they examined the stream of thoughts passing through their minds, would likely be surprised to find how many idle or useless fancies enter and depart within a short time, with fewer than 1/4 being their own. Most are of little value and tend toward evil rather than good. Consequently, people continuously affect one another through thoughts often sent without deliberate intent. Public opinion is largely formed in this way, as it primarily constitutes thought transference. Most people think along certain lines not from careful reflection, but because large numbers of others are thinking similarly and influence them. The strong thought of a powerful thinker extends into the mental world, where it is received by receptive minds that reproduce its vibrations, reinforce it, and further influence others, causing thoughts to grow in strength and eventually affect large numbers of people. Considering thought forms in the aggregate reveals their profound effect in shaping national and racial sentiment, thereby biasing and prejudicing minds. From birth and even before, we grow up surrounded by an atmosphere saturated with thought forms expressing specific ideas, national prejudices, distinctive ways of perceiving, and characteristic patterns of thought and feeling, all of which influence us. Everything is perceived through this atmosphere, every thought more or less refracted by it, while our mental and astral bodies vibrate in harmony with it. Nearly everyone is dominated by the national atmosphere. Once formed, public opinion sways the majority, continually impacting the mind and awakening responsive vibrations. These influences operate during both sleep and wakefulness, with unconsciousness increasing their effect. Most people are receptive rather than initiative by nature, acting almost as automatic transmitters of the thoughts reaching them, thereby intensifying the national atmosphere. An inevitable consequence is that nations, influenced by impressions from other nations, modify them according to their own vibration rates. Consequently, people of different nations, observing the same facts, impose their own preconceptions and genuinely accuse others of falsifying facts or employing unfair methods. If this truth and its inevitability were recognized, many international quarrels would be smoothed more easily than now is the case, and many wars even would be avoided. Then each nation would recognize the personal equation, and instead of blaming the other for difference of opinion, would seek the mean between the two views, neither insisting wholly on its own. Most men never make any effort at real discrimination on their own account, being unable to shake themselves free from the influence of the great crowd of thought forms which constitute public opinion. Hence they never really see the truth at all, nor even know of its existence, being satisfied to accept instead this gigantic thought form. For the occultist, however, the first necessity is to attain a clear and unprejudiced view of everything, to see it as it really is, and not as a number of people suppose it to be. To secure this clearness of vision, unceasing vigilance is necessary. To detect the influence of the great hovering thought cloud is not the same as the ability to defy its influence. Its pressure is ever present, and quite unconsciously we may find ourselves yielding to it in all sorts of minor matters, even though we keep ourselves clear from it with regard to the greater points. We were born under its pressure just as we were born under the pressure of the atmosphere, and are just as unconscious of one as of the other. The occultist imperatively must learn to free himself entirely from this influence, and to face the truth as it is, and not distorted through the medium of these gigantic collective thought forms. The influence of aggregated thoughts is not confined to that which they exercise on man's subtler vehicles. Thought forms of a destructive type act as a disruptive energy and may often work havoc on the physical plane. They are the fruitful sources of accidents, of natural convulsions, storms, cyclones, hurricanes, earthquakes, floods, etc. They may stir up wars, revolutions, and social disturbances and upheavals of every kind. Epidemics of disease and crime, cycles of accidents have a similar explanation. Thought forms of anger aid in the perpetration of murder. Thus, in every direction, in endless fashions, do men's evil thoughts play havoc, reacting on themselves and others. Turning now to the effects produced more specifically by thoughts of individuals, the student will recollect that in the astral body we described the effects produced upon a man's astral body by a rush of devotional feeling. Such devotional feeling is usually accompanied also by thoughts of devotion, draw around themselves a large amount of astral matter as well, so that they act in both mental and astral worlds. A developed man, therefore, is a center of devotional waves, which must inevitably influence other people born both in their thoughts and their feelings. The same, of course, is true in the case of affection, anger, depression, and all other feelings. Another typical example is that of the currents of thought flowing out from a lecturer and other currents of comprehension and appreciation rising from the audience and joining with those from the speaker. Often it happens that the play of the lecturer's thoughts awakens sympathetic response in the mental bodies of the audience, so that at the time they are able to understand the speaker. Later, however, when the stimulus of the speaker is no longer present, they forget and find they are no longer able to comprehend what at the time seemed clear to them. Critical thought, on the other hand, sets up an opposing rate of vibration, breaking up the stream and throwing it into confusion. It is said that anyone who has seen this effect produced is little likely to forget the object lesson. In reading a book, a man's thoughts may attract the attention of the writer of the book, who may be in his astral body, during sleep of after physical death. The writer may thus be drawn to the student, thus causing him to be enveloped in the atmosphere of the writer quite as potently as though he were physically present. Similarly, also the thought of the student may attract to himself the thoughts of other persons who have studied the same subject. An excellent example of the effect on the living of the thoughts of a disembodied man occurs where a man has been executed, say, for murder, and where he takes his revenge by instigating other murders. This is, in fact, one explanation of those cycles of murders of the same type which from time to time occur in communities. The effect of thoughts on children is especially marked. Just as a child's physical body is plastic and easily molded, so are his astral body and mental body. A child's mental body drinks in thoughts of others as a sponge draws up water, and, though it may be too young to reproduce them now, the seed will bear fruit in due season. Hence the immense importance of a child being surrounded with a noble and unselfish atmosphere. To a clairvoyant, it is a terrible sight to see beautiful white child souls and child auras in a few years become soiled, smirched and darkened by the selfish, impure and unholy thoughts of the adults around them. Only the clairvoyant knows how enormously and how rapidly child characters would improve if only adult characters were better. Whilst it is never right to endeavor to dominate the thought and will of another, even though it may be for what seems to be a good end, it is nevertheless always right to fix the thoughts upon man's good qualities, thus tending to strengthen the good characteristics. Conversely, to dwell in thought upon a man's defects or bad qualities is to strengthen the undesirable tendencies or even to produce evil qualities where these previously did not exist, or were merely latent germs. Thus, to take a simple example, suppose that a group of people who indulge in gossip and scandal accuse another of jealousy. If the victim has already a tendency towards jealousy, it is obvious that it will be greatly intensified by such a cataract of thought, whilst even if he is entirely free from jealousy, those who think and talk about his imagined fault are doing their best to create in the man the very vice over the imagined presence of which they gloat so cruelly. The injury done by gossip and scandal is almost immeasurable, and the student will recollect the strong indictment launched against these evil practices at the feet of the master. The form which the criticism of a true occultist will take will be that happy kind which grasps at a pearl as eagerly as much of our modern criticism pounces upon a flaw. Thus the possibility, or rather the inevitability, of being able to affect others for good or for ill by thought power places a tremendous instrument in the hands of all who choose to wield it. Astramental images, thought forms with which emotion of feeling is also associated, play no inconsiderable part in making karmic links with other people. Thus suppose, to take an extreme example, a man by sending out a thought of bitter hatred and revenge has helped to form in another the impulse which results in murder. The creator of that thought is necessarily linked by his karma to the committer of the crime, even though he has never seen him on the physical plane. Ignorance, or the absence of memory, does not cause a failure in the working of karmic law, and a man must therefore reap the results of his thoughts and feelings as well as of his physical actions. In general, the mental images which a man makes largely influence his future environment. In such fashion are made the ties which draw people together for good or evil in later lives, which surround us with relations, friends, and enemies, which bring across our path helpers and hinderers, people who love us without our earning that love in this life, and who hate us, though in this life we have done nothing to deserve that hatred. Hence our thoughts, by their direct action on ourselves, not only produce our mental and moral character, but they also, by their effects on others, help to determine our human associates in the future. It is, of course, possible to protect oneself to a great extent from the incursion of thought forms from outside, by making a wall round oneself of the substance of the aura. Mental matter, as we have seen, responds very readily to the impulse of thought and may easily be molded into any shape we will. The same things can be done with astral matter as we saw in the astral body. Nevertheless, to use a shell for oneself is to a certain extent a confession of weakness, the best protection of all being a radiant goodwill and purity, which will sweep away everything undesirable in a mighty outpouring stream of love. The occasions on which it may be necessary to make use of a shell for oneself are: when entering a promiscuous crowd in meditation, when sleep is approaching, under special conditions where without its help lower thoughts would be likely to obtrude themselves. Will be dealt with in Chapter 16, in Chapter 18, in Chapter 13. A shell has distinct uses when helping other people, and an invisible helper will frequently find it invaluable in helping a man who has not yet the strength to protect himself, either against the ever-present swirl of wearisome and wandering thoughts, There seems no doubt that animals who live in a world of emotion possess a telepathic faculty of sending emotional impulses to others of their kind at a distance. In fact, William Joseph Long, in his fascinating book How Animals Talk, states that he has reason to believe that this method of silent communication is the common language of the whole animal kingdom. Numerous examples are given by this keen and sympathetic observer of animal life. A setter named Don appeared always to know when his master was returning home, even at unusual and unexpected times. He knew also when Saturday or holidays came, and when his master intended to take him out into the woods. Another dog named Watch was repeatedly observed to set out to meet his master at times which constantly varied, within a few moments of the time when his master started for home from a place some 3 or 4 miles away, driving a trap drawn by a horse between whom and the dog there was a strong friendship. The way in which fear or nervousness is readily communicated from a rider to his horse is well known to every horseman. If a wolf cub breaks away from the pack, the mother wolf, instead of chasing the cub, has been observed to remain quiet, lift her head and look steadily in the direction of the cub, whereupon the latter will waver, halt, and speed back to the pack. A vixen appears to have her family under perfect control at every instant without uttering a sound. One steady look at them, and the cubs instantly cease their play, scamper into the burrow, and remain there until mother returns from her hunting. A wounded wolf, after lying up by itself for a few days, has been known to go straight to the carcass of an animal 8 or 10 miles, which the pack had killed in the meantime, there being, of course, no trail to follow. A Captain Rule has observed that the moment he struck a sperm whale, every other sperm whale within 10 miles would turn flukes as if he also had been harpooned. Certain wild birds will make their appearance in the backyard at a moment when a number of other birds are eagerly feeding, and at no other time. The wing drill of starlings is a phenomenon which appears explicable only by the telepathic hypothesis. A similar remark applies to the movements of flocks of plovers. Many huntsmen have observed that if they go out without a gun or any intention to kill, they frequently see and approach very near to wild animals in plenty, but when they go out armed, and with a desire to kill, they find the animals restless, suspicious, and unapproachable. One hunter, who has learnt that excitement is transmissible from man to animals, suppressed his own physical and mental excitement, and found that he could then approach his quarry much more easily than he had been able to do before he had learnt his lesson, the truth of this being proved by the tiger skins he had obtained. Our author goes further, and states that he has met many Indians and others possessed of what certain Africans call chumfo, which acts as though it were a distinct sense, giving warning of approaching danger, etc., often in circumstances which preclude the possibility of any information reaching any of the 5 normal senses. Readers who are interested in this subject in particular and animal life in general are strongly advised to read How Animals Talk and other books by William Joseph Long. Chapter 11. Deliberate Mental Influence and Healing Techniques. It is within the capacity of almost any 2 individuals, provided they devote sufficient time and perseverance and are capable of clear and steady thought, to convince themselves of the possibility of thought transference and even achieve moderate proficiency in the practice. Considerable literature exists on the subject, such as the Transactions of the Psychical Research Society. The 2 participants should agree on a mutually convenient time, devoting 10 or 15 minutes daily to the exercise. Each must ensure freedom from interruption. One assumes the role of thought projector or transmitter, the other that of receiver, and it is generally advisable to alternate these roles to prevent one from becoming abnormally passive. Additionally, it may be found that one excels in transmitting while the other in receiving. The transmitter selects a thought, ranging from an abstract idea to a concrete object or a simple geometric figure, concentrates upon it, and wills it to impress upon the receiver. The mind should be entirely concentrated, in the state described by Patanjali as one-pointed. Beginners should avoid prolonged concentration to prevent wavering attention, the development of poor habits, or fatigue, as seconds may be more effective than minutes. The receiver, ensuring physical comfort to avoid distraction, must render the mind blank, a task difficult at first but straightforward once mastered, and observe the thoughts that arise, recording them without selection or encouragement. The transmitter should also maintain a record of the thoughts sent, and the two records should be compared at suitable intervals. Unless the participants are unusually deficient in willpower and thought control, some degree of communication will develop within a few weeks or months, and in some cases it occurs at the first attempt. The student of white occultism, having confirmed the possibility of thought transference, will not be satisfied with mere experimental exercises or with sending benevolent thoughts to friends, useful though these may be, but will seek to employ thought more effectively. For example, to assist an individual under the influence of a harmful habit such as drink, the student should first determine the hours when the patient's mind is likely unoccupied, such as bedtime, and if the patient is asleep, so much the better. At such a time, the student sits alone and imagines the patient before him. Vivid and detailed picturing is not essential but enhances effectiveness. If the patient is asleep, he will be drawn toward the thinker, animating the mental image created. The student then concentrates fully on the image, directing toward it the thoughts intended for the patient's mind. These thoughts should be presented as clear mental images, as if laying out arguments or pleading in words. Care must be taken not to impose the patient's will. The effort should aim solely to present ideas appealing to his intelligence and emotions, aiding him in forming sound judgment and taking action. If an attempt is made to enforce a particular behavior and succeeds, little or nothing of lasting value is achieved. For, in the first place, the weakening effect of the compulsion on his mind may do him more harm than the wrongdoing from which he has been saved. In the second place, the mental tendency towards vicious self-indulgence will not be changed by opposing an obstacle in the way of indulging in a particular form of it. Checked in one direction, it will find another, and a new vice will supplant the old. Thus a man forcibly constrained to be temperate by the domination of his will is no more cured of the vice than if he were locked up in prison. Apart from this practical consideration, it is entirely wrong in principle for a man to try to impose his will on another, even in order to make him do it right. True growth is not helped by external coercion. The intelligence must be convinced, the emotions aroused and purified, before real gain is made. If the student wishes to give any other kind of help by his thought, he should proceed in a similar way. As we saw in Chapter 8, a strong wish for a friend's good, sent to him as a general protective agency, will remain about him as a thought form for a time proportional to the strength of the thought, and will guard him against evil, acting as a barrier against hostile thoughts, and even warding off physical dangers. A thought of peace and consolation similarly sent will soothe and calm the mind, spreading around its object an atmosphere of calm. It is thus apparent that thought transference is closely associated with mind cure, which aims at transferring good, strong thoughts from the operator to the patient. Examples of this are Christian Science, mental science, mind healing, etc. In those methods where an attempt is made to cure a man simply by believing he is well, a considerable amount of hypnotic influence is frequently exercised. The mental, astral, and etheric bodies of man are so closely connected that if a man mentally believes himself, well, his mind may be able to force his body into harmony with his mental state and thus produce a cure. Helena Petrovna Blavatsky considered it legitimate and even wise to use hypnotism to lift a person out of drunkenness, for example, provided the operator knew enough to be able to break the habit and free the will of the patient so that it might set itself against the vice of drunkenness. The willpower of the patient having become paralyzed by his addiction to drinking, the hypnotist uses the force of hypnotism as a temporary expedient to enable the man's will to recover and reassert itself. Nervous diseases yield the most readily to the power of the will because the nervous system has been shaped for the expression of spiritual powers on the physical plane. The most rapid results are obtained when the sympathetic system is first worked upon because that system is the most directly related to the aspect of will in the form of desire, the cerebrospinal system being more directly related to the aspect of cognition and of pure will. Another method of healing requires the healer first to discover accurately what is wrong, to picture to himself the diseased organ, and then to image it as it ought to be. Into the mental thought form he has thus created he next builds astral matter, and then by the force of magnetism he further densifies it by etheric matter, finally building in the denser materials of gases, liquids, and solids, using the materials available in the body and supplying from outside any deficiencies. It is obvious that this method demands at least some idea of anatomy and physiology. Nevertheless, in the case of an advanced stage of evolution, the will of an operator who may be lacking in knowledge in his physical consciousness may be guided from a higher plane. In cures effected by this method, there is not the same danger that accompanies those wrought by the easier, and therefore more common, method of working on the sympathetic system alluded to above. There is, however, a certain danger in healing by the power of will, the danger of driving the disease into a higher vehicle. Disease being often the final working out of evil that existed previously on the higher planes, it is better to let it work itself out than forcibly to check it and throw it back into the subtler vehicle. If it be the result of evil desire or thought, then physical means of cure are preferable to mental, because the physical means cannot cast the trouble back into the higher plane, as could happen if mental means were employed. Hence mesmerism is a suitable process, this being physical. A true method of healing is to render the astral and mental bodies perfectly harmonious, but this method is far more difficult and not as rapid as the will method. Purity of emotion and mind means physical health, and a person whose mind is perfectly pure and balanced will not generate fresh bodily disease, though he may have some unexhausted karma to work off, or he may even take on himself some of the disharmonies caused by others. There are, of course, other methods of using the power of thought to heal, for the mind is the one great creative power in the universe, divine in the universe, human in man, and as the mind can create so can it restore. Where there is injury the mind can turn its forces to the healing of the injury. In passing we may note also that the power of glamour is simply that of making a clear, strong image and then projecting it into the mind of another. The aid which is often rendered to another by prayer is largely of the character just described. The frequent effectiveness of prayer compared with that of ordinary good wishes being attributable to the greater concentration and intensity thrown by the pious believer into his prayer. Similar concentration and intensity without the use of prayer would bring about similar results. The student will bear in mind that we are speaking here of the effects of prayer brought about by the power of the thought of the one who prays. There are, of course, other results of prayer, due to a call on the attention of some evolved human, superhuman, or even non-human intelligence, which may result in direct aid being rendered by a power superior to any possessed by the one who offers the prayer. With this type of answers to prayer, however, we are not here immediately concerned. All that can be done by thought for the living can be done even more easily for the dead. As was explained in the astral body, the tendency of a man after death is to turn his attention inwards, and to live in the feelings and mind rather than in the external world. The rearrangement of the astral body by the desire elemental further tends to shut in the mental energies and to prevent their outer expression. But the person thus checked as to his outward-going energies becomes all the more receptive of influences from the mental world, and can, therefore, be helped, cheered, and counseled far more effectively than when he was on earth. In the world of the after-death life, a loving thought is palpable to the senses, as is here a loving word or tender caress. Everyone who passes over should therefore be followed by thoughts of love and peace, by aspirations for his swift passage onwards. Only too many remain in the intermediate state longer than they otherwise should because they have not friends who know how to help them from this side of death. The occultists who founded the great religions were not unmindful of the service due from those left on earth to those who had passed onwards. Hence the Hindu has his Shraddha, the Christian his masses and prayers for the dead. Similarly, it is possible for thought transference to take place in the reverse direction, from the disembodied to those physically alive. Thus, for example, the strong thought of a lecturer on a particular subject may attract the attention of disembodied entities interested in that subject. An audience, in fact, often contains a greater number of people in astral than in physical bodies. Sometimes one of these visitors may know more of the subject than the lecturer, in which case he may assist by suggestions or illustrations. If the lecturer is clairvoyant, he may see his assistant, and the new ideas will be materialized in subtler matter before him. If he is not clairvoyant, the helper will probably impress the ideas upon the lecturer's brain, and in such a case the lecturer may well suppose them to be his own. This kind of assistance is often afforded by an invisible helper. The power of the combined thought of a group of people used deliberately to a certain end is well known, both to occultists and to others who know something of the deeper science of the mind. Thus, in certain parts of Christendom, it is the custom to preface the sending of a mission to evangelize some special district by definite and sustained thinking. In this way, a thought atmosphere is created in the district highly favorable to the spread of the teachings thought about, and receptive brains are prepared for the instruction which is to be offered to them. The contemplative orders of the Roman Catholic Church do much good and useful work by thought, as do the recluses of the Hindu and Buddhist faiths, where in fact, a good and pure intelligence sets itself to work to aid the world by diffusing through it noble and lofty thoughts. Their definite service is done to man, and the lonely thinker becomes one of the lifters of the world. Another example, which we may class as partly conscious and partly unconscious of the way in which the thought atmosphere of one man can powerfully affect another man, is that of the association of a pupil or disciple with a spiritual teacher or guru. This is well understood in the East, where it is recognized that the most important and effective part of the training of a disciple is that he shall live constantly in the presence of his teacher and bathe in his aura. The various vehicles of the teacher are all vibrating with a steady and powerful swing at rates both higher and more regular than any which the pupil can maintain, though he may sometimes reach them for a few moments. But the constant pressure of the stronger thought waves of the teacher gradually raise those of the pupil into the same key. A rough analogy may be taken from musical training. A person who has yet but little musical ear finds it difficult to sing correct intervals alone. But if he joins with another stronger voice which has already perfectly trained, his task becomes easier. The important point is that the dominant note of the teacher is always sounding so that its action is affecting the pupil night and day without the need of any special thought on the part of either of them. Thus, it becomes much easier for the growth of the subtle vehicles of the pupils to take place in the right direction. No ordinary man, acting automatically and without intention, can exercise even 1/100th part of the carefully directed influence of a spiritual teacher. But numbers may to some extent compensate for lack of individual power, so that the ceaseless though unnoticed pressure exercised upon us by the opinions and feelings of our associates leads us frequently to absorb, without knowing it, many of their prejudices, as we saw in the preceding chapter, when dealing with racial and national thought influence. An accepted pupil of a master is so closely in touch with the master's thought that he can train himself at any time to see what that thought is upon any given subject. In that way he is often saved from error. The master can at any time send a thought through the pupil either as a suggestion or a message. If, for example, the pupil is writing a letter or giving a lecture, the master is subconsciously aware of the fact, and may at any moment throw into the mind of the pupil a sentence to be included in the letter or used in the lecture. In earlier stages, the pupil is often unaware of this, and supposes the ideas to have arisen spontaneously in his own mind, but he very soon learns to recognize the thought of the master. In fact, it is most desirable that he should learn to recognize it because there are many entities on the mental and astral planes who, with the best intentions and in the most friendly way, are very ready to make similar suggestions, and it is clearly necessary that the pupil should learn to distinguish from whom they come. Chapter 12. Effects of Physical Environment on Mental Functioning. In the mental world there exist certain clearly localized thought centers, actual spatial locations to which thoughts of the same type are drawn by the similarity of their vibrations, much as speakers of the same language are drawn together. Thoughts on a given subject gravitate toward one of these centers, which absorbs numerous ideas, coherent or incoherent, correct or erroneous, acting as a focal point for all converging lines of thought on that subject, these being linked by countless connections to many other subjects. Philosophical thought, for instance, occupies a distinct realm with subdivisions corresponding to major philosophical concepts, and intricate interrelations exist between these centers, demonstrating how different philosophical systems interconnect. Such collections of ideas represent all that has been contemplated regarding the subject. Anyone thinking deeply on philosophy, for example, comes into contact with this network of vortices. If he is in his mental body, whether asleep or deceased, he is spatially drawn to the corresponding area of the mental plane. If the physical body limits this movement, he will instead enter a state of sympathetic vibration with one or more of these vortices, receiving from them all he can assimilate, though the process is less free than actual presence within the center. There is no precise thought center for drama and fiction, but a region exists for romantic thought, a vast and loosely defined area including brilliant but vague combinations concerning sexual relations, emotions characteristic of medieval chivalry, and masses of fairy tales. The influence of thought centers contributes to the phenomenon of people thinking collectively like sheep, as it is easier for a person of indolent mind to adopt a ready-made thought than to engage in the mental labor required to form an independent conclusion. In the astral world, a related phenomenon operates differently. Emotion forms do not all converge on a single world center but coalesce with similar forms in their vicinity, forming enormous, powerful blocks of feeling that float widely, easily affecting those who come into contact with them. Such influences are evident in cases of panic, maniacal fury, melancholia, and similar states, entering through the umbilical chakram. Conversely, noble emotions may beneficially affect a person through the heart chakram. These reservoirs of thought are difficult to describe visually, as each thought appears to carve a track through the matter of the plane, which, once formed, remains open or may be readily reopened, its particles revitalized by subsequent effort. If the new effort aligns generally with the original line of thought, it easily passes along the established track, whereas creating a slightly different line, even if parallel, is far more difficult. The content of these thought centers is more than sufficient for any ordinary thinker to draw upon, and for those with strength and perseverance, additional possibilities connected with these centers remain accessible. First, it is possible through these thought centers to reach the minds of those who generated their force. Hence, one who is strong, eager, reverent, and teachable may actually sit at the feet of great thinkers of the past and learn from them of the problems of life. A man is thus able to psychometrize the different thought forms in a thought center, follow them to their thinkers, with whom they are connected by vibration, and acquire other information from them. Second, there is such a thing as the truth in itself, or, if that idea is too abstract to be grasped, we may say it is the conception of that truth in the mind of our solar logos. That thought can be contacted by one who has attained conscious union with the deity, but by no one below that level. Nevertheless, reflections of it are to be seen, cast from plane to plane, growing ever dimmer as they descend. Some at least of these reflections are within reach of a man whose thought can soar up to meet them. From the existence of these thought centers follows another point of considerable interest. It is obvious that many thinkers may be drawn simultaneously to the same mental region, and may gather there exactly the same ideas. When that happens, it is possible also that their expression of those ideas in the physical world may coincide. Then they may be accused by the ignorant of plagiarism. That this does not happen more frequently than actually is the case is due to the density of men's brains, which comparatively rarely bring anything learned on higher planes. This phenomena happens not only in the field of literature, but also in that of inventions, for it is well known in patent offices that practically identical inventions often arrive simultaneously. Other ideas may be obtained by writers from the Akashic records, but this aspect of our subject will be dealt with in a later chapter. Chapter 13. Mental Body's Impact on Physical Health and Objects. In this chapter, we examine the mental body as it exists and functions during ordinary waking consciousness in physical life. It is convenient to consider in sequence the three factors that determine the nature and operation of the mental body in physical existence. The physical life. In the astral body, Chapter 8, the factors affecting the astral body in physical life were enumerated and described. Most of those observations apply mutatis mutandis to the mental body. We will therefore not discuss them at length here, but briefly recapitulate them, offering minimal comment where necessary. Since each part of the physical body has corresponding astral and mental counterparts, a coarse or impure physical body tends to produce a similarly coarse and impure mental body. Given that the 7 grades of mental matter correspond to the 7 grades of physical matter, the mental body is particularly affected by the 4 orders of physical matter: solids, liquids, gases, and ethers. A mental body composed of coarse mental matter will respond more readily to coarse thoughts than to finer ones. Coarse food and drink promote a coarse mental body. Flesh foods, alcohol, and tobacco are harmful to the physical, astral, and mental bodies, as are most drugs. Where a drug such as opium is taken to relieve severe pain, it should be used sparingly, and one skilled in the practice can remove its adverse effects from the mental and astral bodies after it has acted upon the physical. Moreover, a body nourished on flesh and alcohol is particularly susceptible to nervous disorders when higher consciousness is awakened, partly because the higher consciousness struggles to express itself through bodies burdened with flesh and intoxicated by alcohol. Dirt of all kinds is often more objectionable in higher planes than in the physical. For example, the mental and astral counterparts of physical waste matter expelled as invisible perspiration are highly undesirable. Loud, sharp, or sudden noises should be avoided by anyone wishing to preserve the condition of the astral and mental bodies, which is one reason the life of a busy city is unsuitable for an occult student, and especially for children whose plastic astral and mental bodies are greatly affected by constant noise. The cumulative effect of noise on the mental body is fatigue and diminished clarity of thought. The mental body is influenced by nearly everything in a person's environment. Pictures on walls affect the mind not only because they display ideas, but because the artist invests them with his innermost thought and feeling. These unseen counterparts of the artwork, expressed in mental and astral matter, radiate from the picture as surely as scent emanates from a flower. Books are particularly potent centers of thought forms, and their unnoticed influence can strongly affect a person's life, making it unwise to keep books of an unpleasant or undesirable nature. Talismans or amulets also influence life, as described in the etheric double and the astral body. They operate in two ways: by radiating beneficial waves, and by awakening the faith and courage of the wearer, which mobilizes the reserve strength of his own will. If a talisman is linked with its maker, and the wearer mentally calls upon the maker, the ego of the maker reinforces the talisman's vibrations with a powerful wave of thought. A strongly magnetized talisman may thus be invaluable. Mastery of the physical, emotional, and mental aspects is necessary, with the physical being the most challenging. Some disdain talismans, while others, finding the path to occultism arduous, welcome any assistance available. The strongest talisman on this planet is probably the Rod of Power, which is kept at Shambhala and used in initiations and at other times. A man is affected also by the colors of objects which surround him. For just as a feeling or thought produces in subtler matter a certain color, so, conversely, the presence of a given color even in physical objects exerts a steady pressure, tending to arouse the feeling or thought appropriate to that color. Hence the rationale, for example, of the use of certain selected colors by the Christian Church in altar frontals, vestments, etc., in the endeavor to superinduce the condition of mind and feeling especially appropriate to the occasion. A man is affected by the walls and furniture of his rooms because, by his thoughts and feelings, he unconsciously magnetizes physical objects near him, so that they possess the power of suggesting thoughts and feelings of the same type, either to himself or to any person who puts himself in the way of their influence. Striking instances of this phenomena occur, as is well known, in the case of prison cells and other similar places. Hence, also, the value of holy places, where the atmosphere is literally vibrating at a high rate. A room set apart for meditation and high thought soon gains an atmosphere purer and subtler than that of the surrounding world, and the wise student will take due advantage of this fact both for his own sake and for the helping of those around him. As an example of this kind of thought force, we may cite the case of certain ships or engines which have the reputation of being unlucky. Instances have unquestionably occurred where accident after accident occurs in connection with them without apparent reason. The effect could have been brought about in some such way as the following. Feelings of intense hatred may have been entertained against the builder of the ship or against her first captain. These feelings of themselves would probably not be sufficient actually to cause serious misfortune. But in the life of every ship there are many occasions on which an accident is only just averted by vigilance and promptitude, in which a single moment's delay or slackness would be sufficient to precipitate a catastrophe. Such a mass of thought, forms as those described would be amply sufficient to cause that momentary lack of vigilance or momentary hesitation, and that would be the easiest line along which the malignity could work. It is clear that the reverse is also true, and that a lucky atmosphere can be built up about material objects, etc., by the optimistic and cheerful thoughts of those who use the objects. Similarly, with regards to relics, any article highly charged with personal magnetism may continue to radiate its influence for centuries with practically undiminished force. Even if the relic be not genuine, the force poured into it by centuries of devotional feeling will magnetize it strongly and make it a force for good. There is thus occult wisdom in the following advice, quaint as it is in expression. Knead love into the bread you bake. Wrap strength and courage in the parcel you tie for the woman with the weary face. Hand trust and candor with the coin you pay to the man with the suspicious eyes. The student of the good law has abundant opportunities of distributing blessings all about him unobtrusively, although the recipients may be quite unconscious of the source of that which comes to them. As mentioned in Chapter 11, when dealing with thought transference, physical association with a more highly evolved person may be of considerable help in the development and training of the mental body. Just as the heat radiations from a fire warm articles placed near the fire, so may the thought radiations of a thinker stronger than ourselves cause our mental bodies to vibrate sympathetically with him, and for the time being we feel our mental power increased. An example of this effect often occurs at a lecture. A person in the audience appears whilst he is listening to the speaker to understand fully what is being said, but later the conception seems to grow dim and maybe completely elude the mind when an attempt is made to reproduce it. The explanation is that the masterful vibrations of the stronger thinker have at the time shaped the forms taken by the mental body of the listener, but afterwards that mental body is unable of its own power to resume those shapes. A true teacher will thus aid his disciples far more by keeping him near than by any spoken words. Unseen entities associated with ocean, mountain, forest, waterfalls, etc., radiate vibrations which awaken unaccustomed portions of mental, astral, and etheric bodies, and hence, from this point of view, travel may be beneficial to all three bodies. In general, it may be said that everything which promotes health and well-being of the physical body reacts favorably also upon the higher vehicles. The converse, of course, is also true, the emotional and mental life having profound effects upon the physical body. For, while it is true that the mental and physical bodies are obviously, in the very nature of things, more amenable to the power of thought than is the physical body, yet the matter of even the physical body may be molded by the power of emotion and thought. Thus, for example, it is well known that any habitual line of thought, virtue or vice, makes its impress on the physical features, a phenomenon so common that its full significance has not perhaps been adequately realized by most people. Another example is that of the stigmata, appearing on the bodies of saints, many instances of which are on record. Innumerable other examples may be furnished from the literature of modern psychoanalysis and other sources. In the highly evolved fifth race man of today, in fact, the physical body is largely ruled by mental conditions, hence anxiety, mental suffering, and worry, producing nervous tension, readily disturb organic processes and bring about weakness and disease. Right thought and feeling react upon the physical body and increase its power to assimilate prana or vitality. Mental strength and serenity thus directly promote physical health, for the evolved fifth race man lives his physical life literally in his nervous system. The emotional life. The mental and astral bodies are so closely linked together as to produce profound effects upon one another. The intimate association between kama and manas, and their actions and reactions on each other, have already been dealt with in Chapter 6 on kama manas. In this chapter, we will deal merely with a few further incidental effects of the astral on the mental body, and also with the effect of the mental body on the astral body. A flood of emotion sweeping over the astral body does not itself greatly affect the mental body, although for the time it may render it almost impossible for any activity from that mental body to come through into the physical brain. That is not because the mental body itself is affected, but because the astral body, which acts as a bridge between the mental body and the brain, is vibrating so entirely at one rate as to be incapable of conveying any undulation which is not in harmony with that one rate. A typical example of the effect of powerful emotion on mental activity is afforded by a man in love. While in this state, the yellow of intellect entirely vanishes from his aura. Coarse sensuality in the astral body, which is represented by a peculiarly unpleasant hue, is quite incapable of reproducing itself in the mental body. This is an example of the principle that the matter of the various planes, as it becomes finer, gradually loses the power of expressing the lower qualities. Thus a man may form a mental image which evokes sensual feeling in him, but the thought and the image will express themselves in astral matter, and not in mental. It will leave a very definite impression of its peculiar hue upon the astral body, but in the mental body it will intensify the colors which represent its concomitant evils of selfishness, conceit, and deception. It sometimes happens that certain groups of feeling and thought, some desirable, some undesirable, are closely linked together. Thus, for example, it is well known that deep devotion and a certain form of sensuality are frequently almost inextricably mingled. A man who finds himself troubled by this unpleasant conjunction may reap the benefit of the devotion, without suffering from the ill effects of the sensuality, by surrounding his mental body with a rigid shell so far as its lower subdivisions are concerned. In this way he will effectually shut out the lower influences while still allowing the higher to play upon him unhindered. This is but one example of a phenomenon of which there are many varieties in the mental world. The effect of the mental body on the astral body is, of course, considerable, and the student should pay close attention to this fact. He will recollect that each body is controlled ultimately by the body next above it. Thus the physical body cannot rule itself, but the passions and desires of the astral body can direct and control it. The astral body, in its turn, must be trained and brought under control by the mental body, for it is by thought that we can change desire and begin to transmute it into will, which is the higher aspect of desire. Only by the self as thought can be mastered the self as desire. The very sense of freedom in choosing between desires indicates that something higher than desire is operative, and that something higher is manas, in which resides free will, so far as anything lower than itself is concerned. The student will recollect also that the chakrams or force centers of the astral body are built and controlled from the mental plane, just as the physical brain centers were built from the astral plane. Every impulse sent by the mental body to the physical brain has to pass through the astral body, and as astral matter is far more responsive to thought vibrations than is physical matter, the effect on the astral body is proportionately greater. This process was dealt with in the astral body, to which book the student is referred. Hence, as the vibrations of mental matter excite also those of astral matter, a man's thoughts tend to stir his emotions. Thus, as is well known, a man will sometimes, by thinking over what he considers his wrongs, easily make himself angry. The converse is equally true, though it is often forgotten. By thinking calmly and reasonably, a man can prevent or dismiss anger or other undesirable emotions. An example of the effect of a scientific and orderly habit of mind on the astral body is illustrated in Man Visible and Invisible on Plate 20, which portrays the astral body of a scientific type of man. The astral colors tend to fall into regular bands, and the lines of demarcation between them become clear and definite. In extreme cases, the intellectual development leads to the entire elimination of devotional feeling and considerably reduces sensuality. The acquirement of concentration and, in general, the development of the mental body also affects the dream life and tends to make the dreams become vivid, well-sustained, rational, even instructive. The astral body, in fact, ought to be, and in a developed man is, merely a reflection of the colors of the mental body, indicating that the man allows himself to feel only what his reason dictates. Conversely, no emotion under any circumstances ought to affect the mental body in the least, for the mental body is the home, not of passions or emotions, but of thought. The mental life. Although some little work in the building and evolution of a man's mind may be done from outside, yet most must result from the activity of his own consciousness. If, therefore, a man would have a mental body strong, well vitalized, active, able to grasp loftier thoughts presented to him, he must work steadily at right thinking. Each man is the person who most constantly affects his own mental body. Others, such as speakers and writers, affect it occasionally, but he always. His own influence over the composition of his mental body is far stronger than that of anyone else, and he himself fixes the normal vibratory rate of his mind. Thoughts which do not harmonize with that rate will be flung aside when they touch his mind. If he thinks truth, a lie cannot make a lodgment in his mind. If he thinks love, hate cannot disturb him. If he thinks wisdom, ignorance cannot paralyze him. The mind must not be allowed to lie as it were fallow, for then any thought seed may take root in it and grow. It must not be allowed to vibrate as it pleases, for that means it will answer to any passing vibration. A man's mind is his own, and he should allow entrance only to such thoughts as he, the ego, chooses. The majority of men do not know how to think at all, and even those who are a little more advanced rarely think definitely and strongly, except during the moments when they are actually engaged in some piece of work which demands their whole attention. Consequently, large numbers of minds are always lying fallow, ready to receive whatever seed may be sown in them. The vast majority of people, if they will watch their thoughts closely, will find that they are very largely made up of a casual stream of thoughts which are not their own thoughts at all, but simply the cast-off fragments of other people's. The ordinary man hardly ever knows exactly of what he is thinking at any particular moment, or why he is thinking of it. Instead of directing his mind to some definite point, he allows it to run riot, or lets it lie fallow, so that any causal seed cast into it may germinate and come to fruition there. A student who is earnestly trying to raise himself somewhat above the thought of the average man should bear in mind that a very large proportion of the insurgent thought which is so constantly pressing upon him is at a lower level than his own, and, therefore, he needs to guard himself against its influence. There is a vast ocean of thought upon all sorts of utterly unimportant subjects that it is necessary to strive rigidly to exclude it. This is one reason why to tile the lodge is the constant care of every Freemason. If a man will take the trouble to form the habit of sustained and concentrated thought, he will find that his brain, trained to listen only to the promptings of the ego, the real thinker, will remain quiescent when not in use, and will decline to receive and respond to casual currents from the surrounding ocean of thought, so that it will no longer be impervious to influences from the higher planes, where insight is keener and judgment truer than it ever can be down here. It is only when the man can hold his mind steady, can reduce it to quietude, and keep it in that condition without thinking, that the higher consciousness can assert itself. Then is the man ready to enter on the practice of meditation and yoga, as we shall see in due course. That is the practical lesson in training the mental body. The man who practices it will discover that by thinking life can be made nobler and happier, and that it is true that by wisdom an end can be put to pain. The wise man will watch his thought with the greatest care, realizing that in it he possesses a powerful instrument, for the right use of which he is responsible. It is his duty to govern his thought lest it should run riot and do evil to himself and others. It is his duty to develop his thought power because by means of it a vast amount of good can be done. Reading does not build the mental body, thought alone builds it. Reading is valuable only as it furnishes materials for thought, and a man's mental growth will be in proportion to the amount of thought he expends in his reading.